My name is Rick Firestone.
And my name is Vince Buzzelli.
And you're listening to Pixel Projekt Radio, a podcast about gaming culture, gaming reviews, gaming technology, and gaming in general. We're talking about The Witcher 3 today, CD Projekt Red's magnum opus.
Oh yeah, a game that's been covered many times by many people, gotten some rave reviews, gotten a lot of popular attention. A lot of parts of Reddit love Witcher, the modding community loves Witcher. It's such a well-reviewed game.
So, before we start, why don't we go and give our one-sentence reviews and our little personal rating. Vince, do you want to go first?
Oh, absolutely. All right. The Witcher 3 is a cinematic, engulfing story that has something for hardcore and casual gamers alike. Its intricate, detailed world has set a new precedent for the open-world genre while avoiding some of its worst tropes. 9.5 out of 10.
Nice. Above and beyond on that one-sentence review. 2 sentences.
It was...
My rating is actually the same. I gave it a 9.5 out of 10. And my little snippet is a welcoming experience for both newcomers and veterans. The Witcher 3 delivers an S-tier experience of a WRPG, offering an authentic immersion into a mid to low fantasy world.
Nice.
9.5. Yeah, solid 9.5. Well, let's talk about our histories with the franchise. Mine is a little bit shorter. I slept on this game for years and years. I was aware of it. I had never played any of the other Witcher series. And I was, like I said, I was aware of it, but it was one of those situations where people just start telling you, like, you should play this, and it crosses that threshold, and you're like, well, now I'm just not going to play it because I'm tired of it being recommended to me, and I'm eating crow. I can't believe I slept on it for so long. It's absolutely fantastic. Also, I've never read any of the books or watched the Netflix series, but I'm hoping to get through those pretty soon.
Right, so this is definitely like a wide-scoping game in terms of the open-world nature of it, as well as like the lore building. It's based on a book series, as Rick mentioned, and there's also a Netflix series and all that stuff. And I was the person in question that was begging Rick to play this game for the longest time. I think you wound up picking it up 2 or 3 times before you actually wound up playing through the entire thing. Because
To be clear, it wasn't just you. So don't. Well, I was going to say don't feel too badly, but I guess it's more appropriate to say don't take all of the praise. It was a couple people, but mainly it was you. You're right. Absolutely. It took me 2 or 3 times to pick it up. The first couple of times I just wasn't gelling with the combat, and I kept putting it down and picking it back up, so the flow got really knocked out. And we could talk about that maybe once we get to like the plot, but third time's the charm, and what a charm it was. So you've spent some time within the series franchise though, right?
Yeah, I'll talk about my history with the Witcher series. It's one of my favorite series that I've ever played in terms of games, books. I love the Netflix series. I'm a huge fan. So I will say that I look at this through was it crystal glasses, you would say? What's the expression for that?
I think you're thinking of rose-colored glasses, but
there it is, rose-colored glasses.
That's more nostalgia.
Yeah, well, it is nostalgic for me, and it did come out in 2015, and we're recording this in 2021. So, in preparation for this, it's almost 6 years old. It is 6 years old at this point. In preparation for the podcast, I did start my 3rd New Game Plus playthrough. So I have made it about, I would say, like a quarter of the way through the game. I've put over 400 hours into the game, just Witcher 3. I played Witcher 2 through twice. I have never played Witcher 1 because it would not run on my PC, and I just never tried again to play Witcher 1. But I got most of the story through the books, and it's not really like I don't want to shut down the gameplay immediately, but the story and the characters are very important to me in this series. So this game does strike a lot of nostalgia for me, and it also, and the more times that I play it through, the more times that I go through every time, I find myself noticing more and more things and noticing more and more details, and I fall in more love with it. It's great.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely share those feelings. Just not so much the nostalgia bit, but we'll talk about how the game Witcher 3 in particular treats both newcomers and veterans alike. But let's get some basic stats out of the way, talk about its sort of development and its reception. So like we mentioned, it was developed by CD Projekt Red back in 2011 is when it started. And it lasted roughly 3.5 years. It released in May of 2015 for the PlayStation, Xbox, and PC. Nintendo Switch, it followed closely after in October of 2019. And we just somewhat recently, got the confirmation for PS5 and Xbox Series X and S for 2021.
I actually did not know that until I read it in the podcast notes.
Yeah, that's going to be super
great.
exciting. Because Vince and I played this on PC. We both have PCs that can handle it. And I think we both agree that that's probably the ideal way to play this game.
Absolutely.
Specifically because the PlayStation 4 Pro, and the Xbox One versions all have quirks and bugs within them. The Xbox One, as I understand it, performs the worst with the lowest frame rate and the max amount of sort of stuttering and tearing. Then the PS4, PS4 Pro, Xbox One X, and then obviously PC. I'm very excited to see how it performs on PS5 and the Xbox Series X. I'm probably not going to have either of those consoles, honestly, but I know they're super powerful. I'm very much looking forward to seeing how that turns out.
Yeah, in terms of frame locking and the older generation consoles, I mean, by the time the game released, the PS4 and the Xbox One X had already been out for a few years, and CDPR really wanted to push the visuals in this game, and we will touch on the visuals later because there's a lot to talk about there. But for those of you that are frame rate junkies, for those of you that like to run your games above 60 FPS, even your most cinematic games, if you're playing this on the console, it's just not going to cut it. The game's running at like a locked 30 FPS, and even then on low to maybe medium texture details at the most. I like to crank my details on this game. I liked the frame rate to be above 60 FPS at all times. It was so incredibly satisfying and such beautiful eye candy. So if you can, I would highly recommend playing this game on a PC if you haven't played it already, because most fans of the series, like myself, will listen to umpteen podcasts about this game because I love it.
For sure. And I think it's worth noting too, it's the textures on PC are just worlds better than they are on consoles. I can survive on lower FPS. I didn't on my playthrough. I sat on ultra settings, never going below 80 FPS. But 30 FPS is okay if the textures are really good, which on PC they are. That's probably my biggest complaint on the console side, is that the textures are kind of funky. But even still, console or PC, it still got critically acclaimed with overwhelmingly positive reviews. It actually edged out The Last of Us, whose previous record of 249 awards was standing in 2015-16, and Witcher 3 got 251. So narrowly beat out that behemoth of a game.
That is right, Rick, and that's not only because the game was beautiful. That's because pretty much every aspect of this game that it does well. There are, of course, quips, and there are, of course, quirks, and things that we could definitely fix and talk about, or CDPR, not we. I am not even close to being a game developer, but there are things that could be fixed, but overwhelmingly across the board, this game does a lot of things well.
Yeah, and if you haven't figured it out by now, if you're tuning into this podcast thinking like, all right, we've got like a 2021 perspective on an older game, like let's take it down a peg, you're not going to get that. We're going to be talking a lot of sugar on this game. It's like Vince said, it's got its quirks, and gun to your head, like we've got things that we could talk about that we don't care for in it, but the experience of how well everything else is executed just completely outweighs that.
Exactly. So do you want to dive into story? Because I think that's like the main aspect of this game that we could definitely talk about. Or would you like to talk about the other things and then story at some point?
Yeah, let's get into the story a little bit.
Okay, let's do it.
Cool. So the plot can largely be divided up into two halves, pre-Siri and post-Siri. But I guess that's even getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. So we mentioned the game being kind to both newcomers and veterans. So veterans of the series are going to know the setting and the characters. But if you don't, if you're jumping in as a newcomer, which I am a newcomer to the series, it does a really good job of introducing you to the characters and the setting, the general atmosphere, and sort of the attitude of the general populace towards witchers and sorceresses. So you're playing as Geralt. Geralt is a witcher from the Wolf School, and you start out with a cinematic, this really cool cinematic of who we later will learn is Yennefer, sort of running from this army that we learn to be the Wild Hunt.
Yes, and the Wild Hunt is very, very close on her tails, and she's running away, and in very cool opening cutscene fashion. And this was also the cutscene that played at E3. One of the cutscenes that played at E3 when the game announced. Yennefer, the extremely powerful sorceress, opens up a rift in the world. The entire army falls into it. She turns into a raven and flies away. And that also brings us to our friend Geralt, who is not actually the main protagonist of this story, which we will find out later, but Geralt is at a bonfire with his mentor witcher teacher, Vesemir, and they are in search of Yennefer. So this is a double timeline thing happening. So Geralt is searching for Yennefer. Yennefer happened in the past, and Geralt is happening in the present.
Yeah, and I'm a huge fan of games and media that do this. Games, literature, TV shows, whatever, where the focal character is not the main character. I really think that's awesome. It's tired out. It's a tired out trope where you're like, you are the hero of the story. You are the most powerful thing in existence, and you are going to save the princess, that kind of thing. So I really liked, going through the story, realizing that Geralt is not the main character. This is really Ciri's story. We're just sort of along for the ride. Yeah,
that's right. It's also worth mentioning that in terms of who is a witcher, what is a witcher, we should maybe talk about that, take a pause in there for those of us that may not know. A witcher is a monster hunter for hire that has undergone mutations to make them superhuman, give them superhuman strength, superhuman speed, and cat-like eyes, namely visually. Pale skin, cat-like eyes are the main characteristics of a witcher visually.
Yeah, and these physical characteristics are important because, as you learn pretty quickly within the plot, witchers are not well liked by the general population.
Nope, not at all.
They're seen as sort of freaks. You get called a freak, a mutant, probably worse things throughout the game. Yeah, generally that's what makes this more of a mid to low fantasy setting rather than high fantasy is, witchers and sorceresses are very much considered to be outcasts of society. They're not treated very well. They're feared. They arouse disgust in people. And that's another thing that I liked about this experience is, you come into town, you take up these contracts, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and you're helping people out. And then afterwards, the vast majority of the people are like, all right, thanks, but you got to get the hell out of here. Like, we don't want you here.
Yeah. They pay you, and then you're like, all right, gone. And there's a lot of things that we can touch on in terms of world building later that also follow the narrative of the books very well. But where do we leave off with the story?
We didn't get very far because we like talking about the game so much. So it opens up after that cinematic with a dream sequence where we're introduced to the Witchers of the Wolf School. We see Vesemir, Lambert, and
Eskel.
I always forget that one. Mm-hmm. We're not introduced to those last two by name, but we do get to see them. And most importantly, we see a young Ciri, who Geralt is shown to be training. This, what I liked about this flashback a lot, or dream, not a flashback, is it sets up Vesemir's and Geralt's sort of propensity to talk things through at length, which is important because this game, for newcomers, there's a lot of information that is sort of explored through dialogue. So there's never an information dump. Like, there's no exposition dumps that you see in games where they like take a very, very stunted and ham-fisted way to explain the lore. Vesemir, it's set up in that he as a character he's a teacher. He's an older teacher. He's kind of stuck in his ways. He talks everything through. Like, he's always teaching, even though Geralt and Lambert and all of them are sort of grown and full witchers. He's still kind of teaching.
Yeah,
they're
does
the same
by
thing.
all means like master witchers. They know exactly what they're doing, and witchers do live longer than humans, so we don't really necessarily know how old any of them are, but they're very old and wise.
Yep. So we're going through that dream sequence. Geralt and Vesemir and Ciri and the whole lot do some training, and then Ciri runs off, and then things take a turn.
Oh yeah. After that, the Wild Hunt come to Kaer Morhen, which is the Witcher's fortress, the Witcher's hold. And I do believe, because there are a couple parallels in the story. So Ciri runs away, and this begins our search for Ciri.
Yes, right? Yes, they wake up from the dream. Geralt relays to Vesemir that it was a dream, and he kind of, tells him that he's worried, things like that. And then, we're not going to go through the plot beat by beat like some other really well-done podcasts do. So at this point, the story essentially turns into you're searching for Ciri.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and eventually we do find Ciri, and I do mean that by eventually. It takes about roughly, what would you say, half the game?
I would say like you find Ciri like 40 to 45 hours into this game. It's a very long game.
Yep, it takes a while. You do eventually find Ciri, which shortly thereafter culminates in a really well done battle, the Battle of Kaer Morhen, which is when the Wild Hunt sort of tracks Ciri down, and they come for a showdown. It is probably, for me, this was the high point of the game.
Oh yeah, when Rick was playing through the game and I was asking him questions about, like, I was trying to ask very vague questions. Have you reached X point yet? Have you reached this point? Is this, like, what is this character doing right now? And I was trying to allude to the Battle of Kaer Morhen because the Battle of Kaer Morhen is done so well, and it's set up so well. Geralt is looking for Ciri in Velen, which is one of the main overworlds in the game. There's 4 main maps in the game that are huge. Right, and Geralt's searching for Ciri in Velen. He meets up with a bunch of characters in Velen, talks to them, and then you get these sort of flashbacks of, your Ciri was here, and then you get to play as Ciri, and we'll talk about that too as well. But when Geralt does finally catch up with Ciri, they do have this amazingly, very well done, very well paced, very well voice acted. The gameplay is great. It feels urgent. You have this kind of like standoff with the Wild Hunt where Ciri's like, I don't want to take it anymore. Like, we're gonna fight. And then it's kind of like a get the gang together kind of thing. So, you go through and all these characters that you have helped in the first third to half of the game, you kind of bring them all to Kaer Morhen, the Witcher's stronghold, and you say, hey, all these sorcerers, like all these very wealthy, powerful people, all these militants are going to come and they're going to help us fight the Wild Hunt. And, that culminates in Vesemir's death, which is, spoiler alert, if we haven't already talked about, spoiler alert, Vesemir does die, and that brings about the second half of the game. I think something of note to talk about in terms of Vesemir dying and symbolism as well. Every Witcher school wears medallions, and this is important to the lore as well, because Witchers are magical beings, but they're not necessarily sorcerers or sorceresses. They can conduct very small levels of sorcery, which are called signs. Witchers wear these medallions, and they can sense magic or sense monsters, and the medallion will hum. And you'll often hear Geralt say, like, oh, my medallion's humming, which means there's like a magical presence near. Ciri takes Vesemir's medallion off of his funeral pyre and steals it and runs away.
Yep.
And that's like the culmination of the first half of the game. For me, that was the high point in this game. And I don't know about you, but for me, that was it was a very like tear-jerking moment. Like, this character who we know and love dies, and also this character from the books, like, that you know and love dies, and it's very well done.
Yeah. That middle section of the game, with the Battle of Kaer Morhen, which we can maybe put a pin in and talk about a little bit after we get through the rest of the story. It proceeds to two very well done postscripts to that battle. You could say, wherein Geralt and Ciri both track down 2 different people, or peoples, I guess, and sort of take care of them. One of them is a general of the Wild Hunt. Geralt tracks him down to a festival, and Ciri tracks down three characters known as the Crones. This whole section, though, Geralt and Ciri tracking them down after the battle, I just think is so overwhelmingly well done in terms of pacing and in terms of balance between gameplay and cinematography, or I guess videography, I don't really know, but cutscenes. It's so well done in terms of all of that it just really makes the section that comes directly after kind of seem lackluster in comparison. And that's not a fault of that section. It's more of a giant praise to how well CD Projekt Red paced that middle section. It's never focuses too heavily on narrative, never focuses too heavily on gameplay. It's just really well done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you spin off, Ciri goes and confronts the Crones, and we'll posthumously kind of talk about all of these characters in terms of like the stories and missions. But Ciri confronts the Crones, and Geralt confronts Imlerith, a general of the Wild Hunt. Geralt kills Imlerith. Ciri kills 2 of the Crones. 1 Crone escapes. And we'll talk about what happens after, in terms of endings, what happens to that last Crone. But Geralt kills Imlerith, Ciri kills the 2 Crones, and then they kind of move on in their quest. They meet up at Skellige, I believe, after this, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep,
which is another area of the map. And as the White Frost is ascending, which is canonically sort of this kind of end of days way that the game tells the story of the end of days. Like a lot of games and stories of lore will have this end of days thing, and that's their version. So we have Yennefer and Ciri and Geralt are there, and Avallac'h, which we'll talk about, who is the sorcerer that helped Ciri throughout this whole thing. They make one last stand against the Wild Hunt with the Skellige naval fleet, and they confront the general of the Wild Hunt, whose name is blanking right now. I am blanking on. What's his name again?
Ermion.
Ermion, that's right, Ermion, the leader of the Wild Hunt. Geralt then kills... No, Ermion is the druid, right?
Yes.
What's the name of that dude?
Eredin,
that's it. Eredin.
Yep, so the second half of the game is essentially... if the first half of the game is searching for Ciri and then preparing for when the Wild Hunt first strikes, the second half of the game is largely... time to get back at the Wild Hunt, right? Because we spend the vast majority of the second half of the game after the Battle of Kaer Morhen sort of getting our stuff in line, finding comrades that can help against the final battle of the Wild Hunt, and generally getting our ducks in a row before sort of hitting that point of no return.
And this is also, we learn, after we kill Imlerith, we learn who the Wild Hunt are as players. Geralt and Ciri had always known who they were, but we know now that the Wild Hunt are really just a group of elves. A group of elves from another dimension. So they are mortal. They seem like these immortal figures to us, but they are mortal and they can be killed, and Geralt does kill Eredin. After Eredin dies, the White Frost does come, and you, Ciri, and Yennefer, you being Geralt, kind of take this journey up this mountain to this giant gate with a teleporter, and you're kind of fighting monsters all along the way, and it's really well done in terms of pacing, and you have to kind of like make your way there, and the voice acting makes everything seem very urgent. And this is where Ciri, using her Elder Blood power, this is why Ciri is so important, because she has this amazing otherworldly power that is part of her genetics. This is where the game's endings kind of branch off, and this is the last time that you, as Geralt, could possibly see Ciri. No matter what, Ciri does close the portal and stop the White Frost, but what happens to Ciri kind of depends on what you, as Geralt, have decided to treat Ciri and treat the other characters in the game. She closes the portal, and it's you and Yennefer standing there at the top of that mountain, and then the ending credits roll.
Yeah, and like you said, there are a couple of different endings that you can get. I got what is considered the good ending, and what that entails is you essentially treat Ciri like a human being throughout all of it. You kind of don't put her in a stranglehold in terms of her own autonomy. And what ends up happening is the game makes you think that she has died, and you go back and you tell her father, the Emperor, that Ciri is dead, she's not coming back, and he says, all right, thank you, but I never want to see you again. Get the hell out of here. So you do.
Right.
And you go back to White Orchard. So everything kind of comes full circle. You're going back to the very beginning of the game. And wouldn't you know it, in comes Ciri. And you learn that she is now a Witcher. She is a full-fledged Witcher, having undergone everything. I actually don't remember if she, at that point, underwent the mutations. I don't remember noticing her eyes being different.
She does undergo the mutations.
For that cutscene?
Well, not for that cutscene. I don't think... I think this is one of the things that CDPR doesn't change, but like in the ending cutscenes, you like when the actual ending credits roll, it does say that Ciri undergoes the mutations. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, I knew she underwent them. I couldn't remember for that scene at the inn in White Orchard if she had already. But it does become clear she is a full-fledged Witcher, and that is how it ends with her. You don't end up giving her over to the Emperor, and she doesn't actually disappear and never come back. You also have different outcomes for romantic options. Depending on how you played the game, you can either try to woo Yennefer, the sorceress. You can try to woo Triss, the sorceress. Mm-hmm. You could try to do both, which the game does kind of handle really well and punish you for. Or you could mess up both of them and not end up with either of them. I ended up with Triss. I know that's canonically with the books, that's not sort of the kosher choice, but nope. I just kind of vibed with her much more. So it's implied that Geralt and Triss kind of live happily ever after, and every once in a while Geralt goes out and does a quest. Very kind of home on the prairie sort of ending for Geralt there. You can picture him sort of sipping a lemonade on a rocking chair outside.
Yeah. And my ending, I also got I consider it the best ending as well. Ciri becomes a Witcher. Something worth noting is that no matter what happens, before you kind of undergo the whole White Frost like ending of endings, where it says you must save your game before this point, like this is the terminal point of the game. You make Ciri a sword and you get to name it. Well, you make a sword and you get to name it, and you don't know that you give it to Ciri. But Ciri uses the sword that you named as being a Witcher, and it's kind of like a very like heartfelt, warm ending that Ciri's alive and she's well, and she's kind of continuing on the craft that she knows that Vesemir would have wanted her to carry on with, and she does have the medallion on and all these things in it. It's just like a very satisfying ending. My romance, I chose Yennefer. I always choose Yennefer. I'll choose Yennefer in this playthrough too, because that's just kind of the way that I want it to be every single time. I want it to match the books. Yennefer is Geralt's romance in the books, and Triss is a romance in The Witcher 2, and that's something to touch on as well. If anyone wants to play The Witcher 2, she's the only romance option, so it's either that or nothing.
Yeah, and it's worth noting in this game, in Witcher 3, that there's a lot of sex, there's a lot of doinking, but as far as the main romances go, Triss and Yennefer affect each other directly. So if you do romance options with Triss, it puts you in better standing with her, and that will affect Yennefer, and then vice versa for the reverse situation. You can run into other folks that you can have relations with. One of them that comes to mind is Kira Metz, and various other people, but they don't actually affect the end game in terms of who Geralt ends up with, if anybody at all. Those are all sort of superfluous. And I don't know how you felt about this. I think the romances are done really, really well. Like the romances in terms of the dialogue, the general trajectory, the journey between Triss and Geralt, Yennefer and Geralt, those are great. And I really enjoyed those. I think sex in video games it doesn't do it for me. And especially watching, their polygonal tongues sort of collide into each other. It's just so awkward, and I just really don't like it.
I've heard I don't remember where I've heard it, but I think my favorite way of describing sex in video games in general, because I don't think there's really been any video game that's been able to do it well. Describing sex in video games is kind of like when the two Barbie dolls just kind of collide into each other and their faces just kind of like mushed together, but in games, like, you can see that the character models will be about like an inch away from each other, and they're not actually touching, and it's just like very strange. I wound up about halfway through the game, like whenever I did wind up like encountering a sex scene, I would usually just skip it, to be honest. Like, it really wasn't worth it to me. So this is not, if anyone is a fan of Mass Effect, or if anyone has played Mass Effect, another WRPG that's also an extremely good game in its own right. This is not a game where you can be like, hey, I see another character that I think is great. I want to romance that person, or alien, or what have you. There's not dozens of romance options in the game. There's only 2. And it makes them heavy, and it gives them weight, and they all have weight to the plot. So we kind of have moved on from our abridged version of the plot points, and talk about the romance and what that has to do with the plot. I think it's well done. I think the dialogue is well done. I think the characters feel like they have weight. I think that your choices feel like they really matter. You can romance one character to the other. You can romance both. And Rick, did you wind up romancing? No, you didn't. You didn't wind up romancing both. You did Triss.
I didn't wind up romancing both of them. I did look up the scenes on YouTube to see what happens. So with games like this, it's a very gamer kind of thing to want to sort of exhaust all the dialogue trees and get all of the scenes that you can. And what I like a lot about this game is the game takes into account that sort of gamer-esque nature is going to come out. And it sort of punishes you for it, and it results in a scene where Yen and Triss kind of try and entice you to come to bed together with them, and it doesn't end very well for Geralt. He gets kind of humiliated, and they're like, yep, you can't end up with both of us, serves you right. And I really appreciated that. I like that a lot. It makes it seem much more realistic rather than, get your achievement for romancing Triss and get your achievement for romancing Yennefer too. You can have your cake and sleep with your sorceresses too. I like that a lot. Versus things like, I haven't actually played through the Mass Effect series, but things like Skyrim, where, that there's a lot good about that game, but it's soured for me a lot over the years. And one thing that doesn't really exist in that game is any sort of any sort of separation between choices. You can basically do everything on one go, and Witcher takes that notion into account and says, okay, if you're going to try to do this, that's going to have ramifications here. Right. It's sort of reminiscent to the Fame Infamy thing in Fallout New Vegas. I don't think it's quite as nuanced as New Vegas, but it's miles and miles better than Skyrim, for example.
Well, the thing about, and talking in terms of open world, in terms of WRPGs, like, you have your Skyrims, and you have your, well, there's only one Skyrim, your Elder Scrolls, and you have your Mass Effects, and then you have your Fallouts, your Far Cries, Assassin's Creeds delve into open world, like all of these open world games. This game doesn't really give you those ratings in terms of what you did as good or bad. You can be the worst Geralt in the world. You can do awful things. You can demand lots of money from people. You can always pick the snarkiest, most sarcastic dialogue options. You can pick no romance at all. If you don't want to romance anyone, that's also a fourth option, I would say. You can really do whatever you would like to do, but there's no bar that's necessarily going to say, like, oh, you have all of a sudden become more altruistic, and this is the way that people will treat you in the world. Whether you're nice or not, people still treat you like garbage. They still do not treat you well. You kind of have to make that decision based on your own moral integrity. Like, what do you want your Geralt to be,
Right, yeah. And that's something that I appreciate about this game. It doesn't... New Vegas certainly wasn't like that with the Fame and Infamy meter. I liked that quite a bit. I think that's probably one of my favorite mechanics in WRPGs, but it works with that game because you are just another citizen in the Fallout, right?
Mm-hmm.
In Witcher, you could be, as you said, as altruistic and kind and helpful, never demand a dime, and people are still going to treat you like scum because you are a Witcher. You are something to be feared. You are a street urchin to them. So it doesn't really matter in that way. So I think it's appropriate that, that reputation doesn't follow you. What I meant more so was, like, in the romances, there are certain quests and not factions, but subsets of people where if you do one thing, it's going to affect how other quests play out.
I understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not it's largely not for things like contracts and helping out the townsfolk. They kind of don't like you no matter what you do. So you can do whatever you want. I generally played my Geralt as pretty empathetic, particularly with monsters that were sentient. I always demanded more coin. I never did anything for free because, man's got to eat.
Yep.
And like I said, when monsters became sentient, that's when I started to kind of err on the side of sparing them. My first encounter with one of those, I think you get a contract to drive out a succubus. And in this game, succubi, they don't necessarily kill you after they lure men in to have sex with them. They can. And in fact, I think they all say, or many succubi will say like, yeah, no, I'm not going to kill them. And then they end up killing them. But it's not a hard and fast rule. It's just what happens mostly. Anyways.
It's just that most men in the overworld, especially like this takes place in the, like roughly in the 1200s. And it's kind of inspired by like, Polish fantasy. So that's something to know as well. Misogyny was absolutely rampant in the 1200s in Eastern Europe. Like, so
yeah,
you kind of look at it from this moral standpoint of being like, well, I mean, was the succubus justified in killing this man for being a total asshole? Absolutely. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that opens up, just before we get into that, I did not kill the succubus. That was the first time where I was like, okay, you gotta get out of here. Don't come back. And I'm sure in my canonical playthrough, she did come back after I went. But I told them that she was gone. I don't think I got a reward for that. But yeah, you touch on an interesting thing that I've seen talked about with this game, and that is the treatment of women. So, and I think it's worthwhile to talk about. So in this game, a lot of women are portrayed as, they get catcalled constantly. They're often talked about as, traditional feminine roles, such as, keeping the house clean and desired for their bodies. And I thought about this for a while, and I'm not sure that having it different, that is to say, having women not face those things, I'm not sure in this particular game that would have been ideal, because it comes back to the sort of immersion, like you said, in the 1200s, the sort of general understanding that we have of that medieval time period. It's, that was rampant. There wasn't, it's difficult to judge things like that. We can't look at the year 1200 with 2021 goggles and then retroactively judge, right? That's performative, and it really just serves to make us feel better today, right? It doesn't contribute anything. So, I think it's appropriate to have them being treated as such. Otherwise, they become sort of blank tokens of, female power. And that in and of itself becomes problematic, because then suddenly the only thing female characters can have in terms of character development is the patriarchy's keeping them down. And that's just not realistic. And I want to be perfectly clear, before I get angry emails about, being a men's rights activist. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that treatment of women is something to be taken lightly. I'm saying for the character piece, for the time this is written, for the immersion, it's appropriate. Even Ciri, Ciri is objectively the most badass character in the game. Very powerful. It's her story. She's essentially a demigod. And she gets catcalled when she's walked around. Yep. When she walks around villages, I should say. So it's consistent, and it's keeping with the immersion. And as you're walking around as Geralt, you get your fair share of insults hurled at you and harassment too. So it's not like the treatment of women isn't ideal, but it's not presented in a way that I find to be problematic. Do you know what I mean? Like, what's your take on this? I don't think we've talked about this before.
No, I don't think we've actually personally talked about this off of a recording space, and I think this is a good thing to talk about on the recording space. I think Rick and I both share the same sentiment that we are definitely pro women's rights and women's equality in the modern day space, and I think that's something that we should obviously preface before we get those emails that are like, hey, I don't really think that you guys are treating women fairly.
Yeah,
That's
we're not like
what,
we're not rushing off to play Leisure Suit Larry after we finish
Absolutely
The Witcher,
not.
right?
No.
It's totally different.
No, and a lot of times for me, when I play video games and I see that women are treated in a certain way, or like a very common trope that I see in a lot of video games, and The Witcher is honestly, it has the same thing where you have a woman in armor and her entire stomach will be exposed.
Yep.
And that's just like something that I think just kind of appeals to like a male centric audience, you know.
Yep.
But I will call Witcher on that. I will not call them on the fact that if there were women in the space in the Middle Ages that were a 1-to-1 ratio to the society that we know today in terms of equality and rights, I would kind of call bullshit on that, and it would seem inauthentic to me. Because it is a fantasy world, and it is obviously a work of fiction, but it is based a little bit in kind of in a medieval reality. There are serfs, there are lords and barons, there are kings and queens, there are royalty and lower classes. The gender roles in the dialogue are very well pronounced and well executed. You can't look through this in the lens of in the lens of modern day equality without taking into account the fact that the way they speak, dress, act, the environment, all of these things, it makes the world feel more well-rounded, and it also makes you as the player think, which I think is the most important thing. Like, it makes you think like, hey, like, I really don't think that this female character who's very prominent is treated very well. A perfect example is the sorceresses, Yennefer and Triss, and there are other sorceresses in the game. Kira Metz, Philippa Eilhart, are just two other sorcerers that I can think of off the top of my head, and there are plenty in
Margarita,
the books.
I believe, is one.
Oh, yep. Mm-hmm. Sheila de Tanserville, I think, is in this game, and then there's Fringilla Vigo. There's also a quest where you do with Fringilla Vigo. She's another sorceress that you talk about and meet. The only real reason that they are of any note is because of their magic, not because of the fact that they're women. And they oftentimes like even will allude to that in their dialogue. They'll say, well, like, like my tits aren't here for no reason. And a lot of the way that they dress, like, and they will actually say like very vulgar things like that and very upfront. And that kind of does play into like the whole low fantasy thing where like a lot of the language is just really raunchy and really like gritty. They sexualize themselves to get ahead in the world. And the way we look at it is like, oh, these game developers kind of like over-sexualize these characters. But no, I look at it in the sense of like these characters sexualize themselves because they know that they have these tools that they can use, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And we see that happen with Kira Metz is a great example. There is a quest that you can do with Kira where, spoiler alert, you get the weird polygonal sex scenes.
Oh, baby.
And it's revealed.
Hubba hubba.
Yeah, eyes roll out, tongue rolls out onto the floor. Awooga, awooga. Oh, me honey. And but it's revealed after the fact that she uses you and for sex to do her dirty work. And she is upfront about it. She's like, yeah, I knew I could do it. I'm using what I have, and you fell for it, buddy. Sucks to suck. And I think I appreciated that because it gave Kira Metz some character, because up until that point in this game, we didn't really know much about her. But yeah, it goes back to, it's realistic. And with the sorceresses especially, I think that the developers handled that pretty well. It would have been super easy to, have the NPCs treat them like, you're disgusting, but I still want to sleep with you. It's like, no, they're sorceresses. So no matter how hot they are, quote unquote, they're, vilified.
I agree. And
it would have been easy just for the writers not to do that, not to put this stuff in. But then it comes back to this idea of immersion. And, when things take you out of that immersion like that, it's difficult to, continue in a meaningful way. So
right. And that's also something that's very present in the books as well. Geralt is a very well-known womanizer in the books, and that's kind of like how I think it's. Oh, I don't want to butcher the author's name. Subkowski is he's a Polish author. It's a Polish book series. the way that he treats Geralt and treats the other sorceresses is very one-to-one from the CDPR games to the books. They kind of keep that narrative the same, where like all the sorceresses will use sex as a tool, and a lot of powerful women in this space, in this world, will use sex as a tool because they know it works, and men are the dominant class. So they know it works against men, and it's this Achilles heel throughout the entire story. And Geralt is a very powerful man, not in terms of politics, but he's very cunning. He speaks well. He knows his place, and he uses his place to his advantage. So if anyone wants something from Geralt, they know they can get it from him with sex. And I think it's very interesting to think about that.
Yep, for sure. Yeah. Maybe moving away from the discussions of gender for a little bit, just so we can touch on the rest of the game, and so we don't end up saying anything super problematic by accident. We would love to hear from you if you have any other thoughts on this sort of thing. We'll put the email in the show notes that you could reach us at. But yeah. So do you want to? We covered the main story. We kind of glossed over in a bit of a reductive way the beginning of the story prior to meeting Ciri. As we discussed before, it largely is you're just going from place to place, sort of finding out where she's been, who she's talked to. You get some flashback scenes where you get to be Ciri and sort of live out where she went, and then bounce back to current day as you're on her trail. Mm-hmm. And do you want to talk about sort of some of the quests on the way that ended up being memorable for you? I know we share a major one that we both really enjoyed.
Yes. Yeah, and I think I know exactly which one you're talking about.
You want to talk about that first?
Yeah. And just as an aside to what you said, there are other podcasts that do well the kind of description of the story piece by piece. There are places where you can find the story piece by piece, and hopefully if you're listening to this podcast, you've at least played the game in some capacity before you are listening to this entire podcast, because it's definitely meant to be consumed as a one-to-one piece of media, So we're kind of just popping in and out, kind of finding our favorite places in the story, favorite missions and whatnot. But you, Geralt, are in Velen, which is war-torn, and has been kind of destroyed by Nilfgaard. Nilfgaard is invading from the south, and the four kings of Velen, four rulers of Velen, one of them is a queen, whose names elude me right now, are trying to kind of defend the Pontar Valley, which is this river that runs and that kind of separates Nilfgaard from the northern kingdoms. And Nilfgaard has invaded and has broken these lines, and Velen is war-torn. Velen is destroyed, and this is kind of where you wind up. And the Bloody Baron, Philip Strenger, I think is his name, but he's called by the Bloody Baron. And you, Geralt, discover the Bloody Baron in your search for Ciri, because Ciri has wound up here before, under his care. He's kind of the unofficial ruler of Velen. He's kind of taken control by force, really, taken all the money, all the troops, taken the stronghold, because he saw the opportunity and seized it. And this was, I think, one of my favorite mini story arcs in the entire game. The entire Baron questline, because the Baron questline is kind of an umbrella with a few other questlines, and then when the Baron's story culminates, it's very well done. This as a game, a lot of the characters do not share with you all of the information at once, so it plays out a lot like a novel or a lot like a movie. Whereas if you were playing a Fallout, you show up to this guy in this house, this guy tells you, oh, I need to find my sister. She's lost. Okay, you go find the sister, you bring the sister back, you get your experience points. You show up to the Bloody Baron, you're looking for Ciri, and the Baron's like, hey, I need my wife and my daughter back. They're gone, I don't know where they are. Can you please find them for me?
And at this point, he reveals that Ciri was there.
Yes.
And he knows where she went. And he's like, yeah, I'll tell you, but man, I sure wish my wife and daughter, sure wish I knew where they were. So he kind of blackmails you into finding out what's going on. But before you go, you notice that things are a little weird in the house. Yeah. You go around searching for Ciri with your Witcher senses, which we'll talk about when we get into mechanics, and you find the upstairs is just in a state of disarray. There's holes in paintings. There's like scuff marks on the floor.
Broken candlestick.
Broken candlestick. A huge wine stain. So something's not adding up.
Mm-hmm. Right. So you kind of set off to find. I believe you try to find the Baron's daughter first, and you go around Velen and you're asking these people for. Where do I find the Baron's daughter? Like, I really need to find her. You go to her last known location. You talk to a bunch of people, and eventually you figure out that you find a man in like a small fishing hut that the Baron has blackmailed into not really saying anything. And you kind of push the man and you're like, hey, like what really happened? And the man winds up telling you, and you can also find out in a different way by using your Witcher senses by confronting the Baron, that the Baron beat his wife. She miscarried, and the daughter ran away. And the daughter is about in her 20s, so she's definitely old enough to be on her own at this point. So you hear from this man, the daughter is in Oxenfurt, which is a city to the east of there. So you go to find the daughter in Oxenfurt, and then the daughter kind of shares this information, like, oh, my father's a total piece of crap. Like, he's the worst guy ever. Like, I never want to go back there. Relay that message to him. Like, please never visit me again. And
yeah, it's revealed here that the Baron has left out a significant portion of the backstory, and that portion is everything that made him look like a huge piece of shit, which he is. He's a really awful, deplorable, duplicitous character.
Right. And you, as a player, are, because of the dialogue and how well the dialogue is done, and you are hearing kind of the Baron's version of the story first, and then the other versions of the story later, it's kind of, it's so well done the way that they present it to you, in the sense that, like, you, with every fiber of your being, want to hate him. You're like, this guy's a deplorable human being. Like, he did so many bad things to so many people. Not only took over a land of poor serfs, but then is a drunk, beats his wife, abuses his daughter, all of these things. And you want to feel this, like, the game wants you to feel this sympathy in the way that they present you this dialogue. But in my dialogue options with the Baron, every single time, I always pick the nastiest ones. I was like, yeah. I would always pick I would just like twist
really
the knife
twist the
on
knife.
this guy.
Yep.
Yeah. Like, and he'd be like, oh, you don't need to tell me. I already know. And he would always kind of remind you every time, like, I know what I've done. I know I've done wrong. It's like, all right, it's a little too late for that now. Yep. At some point you made your bed, you got to sleep in it.
Yep. And what I also appreciated about it is, it would have been really easy and somewhat lazy on the devs' part, on the writers' parts, to sort of keep the Bloody Baron as that sort of awful character, and then just have his wife as a sort of placeholder. They humanize her a little bit, and you learn through the backstory that, he came home as an alcoholic from the war. He's abusive to her. And so because of his actions, and I want to preface this by saying I am not faulting the wife at all. I understand exactly why she did the things that she did, and I in no way paint her as a villain, but she begins to take up an affair, multiple affairs, and also begins every night to sort of just completely go aggro at him and, say, just leave, just die, things like that. And again, understandable. And that's what I liked about that writing, is that they humanize the situation. Bloody Baron is still obviously the villain. He's still the biggest piece of shit. But they play the scenario out in such a way that makes it seem very real, like something that could happen in modern day.
Yes.
And man, did I appreciate that a lot.
Yes. And this game, this is one of the, I'd say, one of the cornerstone quests for the entire vibe of this game, is that you find this man, and this man tells you to do something, and instead of being like, oh, I found the guy that did it, there's a lot of other missions in this game where a lot of times the character that's asking you to do something is often lying to you. And you have to figure out why they're lying, or how they're lying, or figure it out with your Witcher senses, or ask somebody, or there's lots of other ways that, and multiple ways that you can complete a lot of different missions, where this person sends you on this wild goose chase, and you come back and you're like, hey dude, what the hell? You just sent me on this wild goose chase. It was your fault all along. Why did you do this to me? So, and going back, I know I don't want to bring up the topic of gender again, but a lot of these things kind of support the stuff that we were talking about before. The daughter leaves and the wife leaves, and then like these are all things that are uncommon for the time, but they could happen, you know. They could happen, and it's believable. All of it's believable, and it makes it feel real and humanized.
For sure.
So you find I think you want to talk about the crones now.
They kind of tie into finishing up the Bloody Baron's quest.
Yep. So you found the daughter in Oxenfurt, and you go back to the Baron, and the Baron gives you the first half of Ciri's story. Ciri shows up, she races the Baron for a horse, she wins the horse race, she beats him because she's a total badass. Ciri basically never loses anything in this entire game. You're never meant to lose anything as Ciri because it happens in the past, and that makes perfect sense. So you go on this journey to find the Baron's daughter, and the only thing, wife. And the only thing the game really tells you is just to explore the other options in Velen. So you go to the Crones of Crookback Bog, which Kira Metz turned you on to after you kind of finish your mission with Kira Metz. And you discover that the Crones of Crookback Bog have kind of taken Anna Stringer, the Baron's wife, as, I don't know whether she's under a total complete spell and she doesn't remember who she is at all, but they've taken her as hostage to raise the children that they have also taken as hostage and plan to eat. Because the Crones of Crookback Bog are probably some of the scariest, creepiest video game models that I've seen in
They're my favorite
memory.
Character designs in the entire game.
Yes. Brewis, Weavis,
and Brewis, Wispess, and Weavis.
Wispess and Weavis, that's right, yeah. And one of them has like a bee's nest for a head, and arms in a sack on her side, and they're old and wrinkly, and
they also hit on Geralt very explicitly every time he's around. They're just like, "Hey, big boy, you want to stick around? Blow your mind."
We got a perfectly great cabin in the middle of this swamp that if you're ready for a 3-on-1, we're ready too, kind of thing.
Yeah, they get real explicit. And it's hilarious because, Geralt's a great svelte looking guy, and these creatures, they're called the Ladies of the Wood, and they're depicted in murals as in conventionally beautiful naked women. That is not what they are. They are monsters that have like
almost angelic
skin, a wasp's nest for an eye. One of them wears like a basket for a head and is like 3 people wide. It's just really, really good character design. Definitely take a look on the Google if you can do that right now if you're not driving. But yeah, they so we go and we find them. They've taken Anna Stringer sort of as hostage. And yeah, like you said, they also have a bunch of children at the orphanage that they look after and essentially are keeping to eat as well.
Yep.
With Anna, who is the Baron's wife, it can go a couple of different ways for her story to kind of play out. What happened with mine is I can't remember the choices that I made, but she did not end up well in the Crone's eyes. They were very upset with her and they punished her. And in a later quest, you find out they turn her into a water hag.
Yep, they do. So there's a couple different endings for Anna, and there's a couple different endings for the Crones as well, or like that whole little mini arc, as I'll call it. And then also ties into what happens to the Baron. The Crones send you on this quest to this big tree, and they're like, "Hey, there's a really evil thing that lives under this big tree." So you're like, "All right, Crones, I want the Baron's wife back. I need Ciri back. So I'm going to go find the big thing in the tree, and I'm going to kill it," right? So you show up, and the big thing in the tree is like, "Hey, I'm actually not evil. I'm just an elven spirit that has been transformed into this big evil thing because the Crones did this to me. Release me, and I'll be able to save everyone. I'll save the children that the Crones have hostage," right? So you can choose 2 options. You can release the thing, or you can kill it. If you release the thing, what happens is the children and Anna are saved. But the thing kills everyone in the town. Everyone. This entire, cute little town, you're walking through merchants, families, all this stuff. It kills everyone.
And I think if you go back later, all of the children are put into an orphanage. So
Yep.
they're only technically saved. I went through that whole thing. I found that thing, and it's very clearly just the face of evil. And it's saying, release me. And this is where my role-playing broke down, because I knew that was not the good choice, but I released it anyway. And it's even like, it's comically dark. So it's like, bring me my bones and a wild horse that I could take over. And, as you're doing each step of this, the way that they frame the camera and the setting and the scene, it's so clear that you've made the wrong choice.
Yep.
And so it takes over the horse and, it turns the horse into a sort of dark, red-eyed, evil version, and it goes off. And nobody is happy about this. It's just instantly clear that you made the wrong decision, which is what I did.
And you absolutely can. And again, Geralt's treatment of sentient monsters, you show up and this thing is like, hey, it lies to you. It basically is like, and you don't know whether it's lying or not, because a lot of people in this game do not tell you the truth. And that's very true for the entire portion of the game. You are lied to constantly, even by people that are close to you. So I chose, for my first playthrough of the game, I also chose to release it. For my second playthrough, I learned better. And I was like, hey, this guy's going to die. I'm going to kill this. And it looks like it looks like the beating heart of a blue whale in a cave underneath a tree. Like, it's creepy looking.
Yeah.
It's weird. It looked creepy. I don't know why anyone would release it, but we did, because you're like, well, I'm going to pick something. So, if you
gamers, man, you got to get the achievement.
You got to get the achievement. If you kill it, then they turn Anna into a water hag, right? Like Rick said before. And the children, I don't remember what happens to the children if you kill it. Do you know what happens to the children if you kill it?
I did not look that part up on YouTube.
Yeah, I didn't look that up either. So I'm not exactly sure what happens to the children, but either way, really, like there's no happy ending to this story of the children and the crones of Crookback Bog and Anna Stringer. Poor Anna Stringer lost her mind completely. She's done for. And then so you go back to the Baron, and after all of this happens, and you say, no matter what choice, you say, hey, I found your wife. She's not doing well, dude. I couldn't bring her back with me. The crones still have her. And the Baron basically has this breakdown, and he's like, oh, I've messed up my entire life. And he uses very vulgar words, like we said, because of the fact that it's this low fantasy world. The Baron definitely does not speak in a way that is politically correct. He uses a lot of curse words, and he basically says like, oh, I have no more will. Like, I don't know what to do anymore. And you're like, all right, dude, just tell me where Ciri is. Like, you're a piece of shit. I want Ciri. So then he gives you that second half of the Ciri story.
Yep, but before his plotline finishes up, I think it would be cool to talk about the final thing that you do in that, which is take care of the miscarriage. You remember?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned a while ago that, when the Baron beat his wife, she did miscarry. And the crones played a large part in saving her, so she didn't die from that. But the miscarriage in the Witcher universe, since the baby was not named or properly buried, it turned into what's called a botchling. And it looks like a sort of demonic, oversized, and misshapen baby. Also really great character design.
And it feeds on pregnant women.
Yeah. And you've got to take care of this. So you've got two options. You can either go and, dig it up or not dig it up. You have to go find it and then bury it, or you can do this really involved spell or ritual.
Yeah, well, you don't find it and bury it. You find it and kill it. You either just go dig it up and you're like, all right, Baron, show me where it is. And then you kind of chop its little gross baby head off and then job done. You're out of here, Or you can do the whole spell thing where you bury it under the threshold of the house, wait 24 hours, the Baron has to name it, and then it leads you to more clues about where Anna is.
Right, that's right.
The state of Anna. Yeah.
So what I did, I did not kill it. I thought that it would be much more fitting to force the Baron to pick it up and carry it all the way back
to
the house. because, like you said, he made his bed. He's got to sleep in this. So this turns into a sort of an escort quest. It's not that big of a deal. Like other escort quests, the Baron doesn't have health. You don't have to sort of protect him as you're going. You do have to fight off wraiths. And then as you're going, you might have to calm down the botchling with your Witcher signs. But the whole way, the Baron is carrying this monstrosity that only exists because of him. You bury it, and then you wait 24 hours, which for me was me just meditating outside of his window for 24 hours.
Yeah.
Which I imagine him just looking out and seeing me kneeling there and just checking his watch.
And we'll talk about the canonical implications of that and like the things that Witchers can do later on. That's all gameplay mechanic stuff, and also that has to do with the lore. But yeah, the botchly comes to life, and then it turns into a lubberkin. And the lubberkin takes you on this journey. It's again another follow quest, and there aren't very many follow quests in this game, or partner accompaniment quests. But this is one of the few that actually works out. This is one of those things where like you follow it, and it actually moves at a reasonable speed.
Yeah, thankfully.
Thankfully, it moves at a reasonable speed, and it kind of tells you all the things that you already have found out about Anna, and you can do these quests in any order. So what I did was, every time, because I knew after I played my first playthrough, you do the Lubberkin quest first, so that it leads you to all of those clues about Anna and her miscarriage and where she is with the crones, and then you do the crones quest last, so that you know like where Anna is and all that stuff. I don't know what order you did them in.
I think I did it in that order.
The ending to the Baron's romp around Velen is you return to Crow's Perch, the fortress where the Baron kind of like roosted. Great pun. He has hanged himself from the tree in the courtyard in the garden where his wife loved to be. And that is the end to the Baron's story. I don't think there's any other ending to the Baron's story besides him hanging himself. Or should I say, I don't think there's any other ending that should happen besides him hanging himself.
Yeah, I can get behind that. I think there is an ending where he takes care of his wife, who is like borderline comatose, but I'm not sure how you get that one. I got the ending where he hangs himself as well.
Okay, wait. Now that you say that, I think that's actually kind of a sweeter ending.
Where he takes care of his wife?
Yeah. It makes it sound very heartless, but regardless, it's not a happy ending. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
None of it's
nobody's getting out of that quest line feeling good.
No. And it's very unfortunate, and it makes the world seem real, and it carries, like, these consequences carry throughout the entire game. So we talked about this specific quest at length, but a lot of the quests in this game are absolutely like that, where you will get to the end of a quest, and oftentimes characters will have these situations and decisions of mortality that decide the rest of their lives because of these decisions that they have made, or like, hey Witcher, I fucked up, like I gotta need you to help me, and then and it doesn't work out well for them at all. The world is dark. Like, it's a very dark, real, encapsulating world.
Yep, for sure. So in terms of other quests, like you said, we went on about that one for quite a while, but I think that's a testament to how engaging it is. Mm-hmm. In terms of some other quests throughout the story, either pre-Ciri or post-Ciri, there weren't any that struck me quite as strongly as the Red Baron's quest. I think that was, as far as side stories go, probably the high point for me. That is to say, not dealing directly with the Wild Hunt. There are some other good ones, some other ones with some charm. Typically ones dealing with Dandelion tend to have some charm and humor. You get to put on a play, which I think is really interesting. At one point, you are trying to lure out this changeling named Dudu, the very unfortunately named Dudu. And he's a changeling, so we don't really know what he is or who he is, I guess,
or what he looks like at any point in time.
Yeah. So you're around some artists, a troupe of actors, and of course their solution is, well, let's do a play about it. And I thought this was kind of hilarious. It gave me strong like Final Fantasy VI vibes with the opera scene, Insofar as it was like, it was so earnest that it was funny. Seeing Geralt act on stage, Geralt plays a witcher on stage in the play, and seeing his attempts at acting are just hilarious. He speaks very flatline throughout the entire game, and he acts very much the same way, and it's so uncomfortable. I botched the lines. I think I got one right.
I botched every single one too, because either you write them all down or you don't, and you just try to remember them, and I just, quite frankly, was not writing them down.
Yeah, we should say you're given your lines in advance. This is directly just like Final Fantasy VI. You're given your lines in advance, and you're expected to read them and remember them so you can make the right choice when you're given the option. I did not do that. I did not read them. I just went straight into the play, and I guessed on everyone, and I only got one right. So almost every time after Geralt spoke, the audience was just kind of staring, going like, "Oh, what's all this? What's going on here?"
Right.
And it was so painfully awkward. But you put on this play, and it's, the message of the play is, hey, changelings are good people too. And this lures out doo-doo.
Right. But if you are a changeling in the audience, I am a very good witcher. I would like you to show up at this place at this time, please. And then
yeah, that's pretty close to exactly what they say. I like that they didn't take this play so seriously. They've proven their writing chops throughout the entire game.
Yep.
And then you get to this play that's just over the moon with camp and just absurdity. It's exactly what you would think of when you think of like art from that time period. It's not going to have the sense of culture that we have, hundreds and hundreds of years later. It's very funny. I enjoyed that quest a lot.
This is a juxtaposition of the different like moods in the game. Like Geralt is throughout the whole game very sarcastic. And that either comes through in the tone of his voice, because witchers are not known to be very emotional, because they're usually like, it's said in the lore that they're stripped of their emotion. And again, we'll do our whole lore encapsulating world thing in a bit, but he's sarcastic, and the game takes itself seriously, but then knows when not to take itself seriously, and knows when it's allowed to be totally ridiculous and totally stupid in terms of the dandelion stuff and the plays and finding all these characters that are friends with Geralt, because Geralt is surrounded by a lot of characters who are, quite frankly, like idiots most of the time, which I think is very funny. Like Dandelion is not a very bright person in the sense of like his womanizing or his drinking or his partying, and Dudu gets himself into a lot of trouble. Triss gets herself into a lot of trouble. A lot of the characters which he's friends with, Lambert and Eskel, the other two witchers, are very ridiculous. The game and the books do a great job, but the game does a great job in its own writing of providing this comic relief to this story and this world that's like very heavy, referencing back to the Baron and all of that stuff. It's great.
Yeah, I know a lot of people are, divided on this. I really liked Dandelion. I thought he was really charming as a character. I always liked interacting with him. He's like, he's a total bro. And, he's a bit of a skirt chaser. He chases after women completely, to his detriment oftentimes. But it's never in a way that's like gross. It's like in a way that's like very middle school-esque. Like he'll chase after them and say like, "Hey, I want to see my mold collection," and then he takes out a book on different kinds of molds. And you can talk to the people that he tries to woo afterwards, and they're like, "Oh yeah, he just kept following me, and he was talking about mold. Like, what is this?"
Right. It's not in a creepy it is a little creepy. But it's not in such an offensively creepy way. It's in more of like a comically humorous kind of way, where a lot of these women are like, "Hey, dude, I need you to back up. Like, I need you to give me some space right now." Like, it's very analogous to like when you're talking about the middle school. Like, a girl closes her locker and he's like standing behind the locker with his elbow on it. Like, "Hey, baby, what's going on?
Yeah, hey, want to see my Yu-Gi-Oh cards? I've got Exodia." And yeah, there's at one point you have to track down a series of people that Dandelion has tried to woo for some quest element. But one of them, turns out you find him and it's a man who was dressing as a woman and going out to pubs. And at that point, I know I had heard that CD Projekt Red does not handle trans issues very well in Cyberpunk. So when I got to that point, my hackles went up, and I was like, oh, I don't know what to expect. And it turns out it was handled kind of fine. It's explained that the character just feels really comfortable and loves dressing up as in feminine presenting clothing, and it just makes him feel like who he is.
Right.
So Geralt's like, okay, yeah, that's cool. And Dandelion hits on him and says like, hey, want to go home? And then he's like, well, yes, but I'm a dude. And Dandelion is like, that's cool. You're pretty cool, though. Let's be buds. Let's hang out.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a really charming ending, and it fit into Dandelion's character really well. Like, had they written it in another way, like Dandelion being disgusted or something gross like that, that wouldn't have jived quite as well, because Dandelion doesn't really have a lot negative to say about people in general. He's very much a foolish optimist, it seems.
Yep.
That was just a very charming quest and a charming little ending, I thought.
Right. And I think we can use this quest, like we've talked about our main quest juxtapositions and like our favorite parts of the game. And that kind of, it's hard to generalize in a game like this because it's so long. It's so big and so detailed, and there's so much to do. But if we could segue into like the writing and the world building style and maybe talk about those things as in relation to this quest and the Bloody Baron quest and maybe other quests that we can reference. If I could talk about the writing for a second, the voice acting in this game is amazing. The way that the characters speak, the dialect that they use, the way that it's written out, it doesn't feel like it's written by someone who's very highbrow, who's kind of like trying to sound like a poor medieval serf. It's written like it's actually a poor medieval serf that's talking to a witcher. Like, you'll walk up to someone and they'll be like, oh, Master Witcher, like, please help me. Like, me horse has gotten, or I can't, I'm not even going to try, but like, the way that it makes you feel as you're listening to these voice actors. First of all the voice actors are different.
It doesn't have the Oblivion Skyrim problem where you've got like 3 voice actors playing every character in the game. Right.
So one person in one village who's just like a peasant that wants a monster killed, and then a person in literally the next village over. Some of the facial things are reused, like some of the facial models are reused and haircuts and whatnot, but like
there's just so many characters in different settings that, that seemed unavoidable.
Right.
But speaking of the voice acting, I'm pulling this statistic out of my memory bank, so it could be wrong, but I thought I read somewhere that the voice acting alone took over a year to complete in and of itself.
That's right.
I do know that's right. It shows. It's really stupendous. Like, yeah, sometimes you get some weird facial animations that don't quite match the tone of what the person's saying, but the voice acting in general is so well done, especially the main and secondary characters.
And it was recorded in many languages too. So that's also something to consider. So that they took the time to not just record it in Polish and English, but also to record it in so many other different languages. This is a very popular game in Spanish-speaking countries. I did not know that. Apparently the Spanish is very well done. Like a lot of the things are, the translations are done well. The characterization is done well. You feel something through the voice acting, and we'll talk about the facial animations later, but the voice acting is really what drives it home for you and makes it very humanizing. I can't emphasize enough how much I really, really loved the quality and the varied nature of the voice acting. Walking through the overworld, when you're kind of like walking through a town and you're walking past merchants and there's like peasants outside that are like cutting firewood, you'll hear them talking to each other. And I rarely, if ever, would hear NPCs say the same thing twice, where it was so memorable that I was like, oh my god, this again? Are you kidding me? Like, I have to hear this guy say this thing again? Like, it almost made me want to walk through the town instead of running through the town, where I would normally be like...
The only thing that took me out of that was if you bump into people while you're walking or running, there's like a 90% chance you're going to get the same groan, and it's always that, oh...
Yeah.
Just every time. And from every
Yeah.
male person in the game. It's
I have a
then...
list of tropes, and that's one of the tropes that and I want to just like go through every single one because I have so many that just like plagues open world games. But that's the funniest one to me, where you bump into someone and they make that weird like, I don't even know what kind of noise that is. Like, why would a person make that noise?
I don't know. It's like a distressed groan from like an animal.
Terrible. It's honestly terrible. But and the Geralt voice acting, like, let's talk about that for a second. Just all of the different lines that Geralt has. If anyone spends some time on the Witcher 3 subreddit, there are some things that Geralt says like over and over and over and over and over again, like, "Oh, medallions humming," or like "winds howling." If like the wind is blowing, or sometimes you'll just be like standing and he'll be like "winds howling," like it doesn't make any sense. But those are the only like glaring issues in Geralt's voice acting. Otherwise, for the very monotone inflection that he has as a character, as a voice actor, I think that the at least the English voice actor for Geralt does an excellent job. Really.
Yeah, I can't imagine hearing anybody else speak that way. Even watching The Witcher on Netflix, I did watch part of the first episode, and hearing is that Henry Cavill playing?
Yeah.
I mean, and this is not to his detriment, but it just doesn't sound right to me because I'm so used to Geralt in the game. One thing in terms of the writing, where Geralt is not strictly flatlining his speech, is when he is drunk. And there are a couple of scenes of drunk Geralt in the game, but the best by far is when you meet back with the other Witchers, Esco and Lambert, and you all decide to get drunk.
Oh,
and
yeah.
This was, well, it was one of my favorite parts of the game because it comes at a time when there's not much levity. Things are very, very dire, and everybody is like, well, we haven't seen each other in a while. Let's get wasted.
Oh, yeah.
And you do. You get to play Never Have I Ever with the other Witchers, and they're all very Witchery things, like Never Have I Ever Slept with a Succubus, or, Never Have I Ever Leapt Out of a one-night stand's window. Just very Witchery things. You get to kind of decide what kind of a rascal Geralt is. You could choose whether you drink or whether you don't.
So, fun fact, in the books, all of those Never Have I Ever things actually happened to Geralt.
Every single one?
Yes. So, leapt out of a one-night stand's window. Do you remember Shani from Novigrad the Medic?
No, I don't.
Did you ever do the Shani quests? The Shani side quests?
It's not ringing a bell.
Okay. Well, you can do, and this is an excellent point to bring up how big this game is. There are probably some things that Rick has not done, and there's probably some things that I have not done in the game, and I'm like a very completionist type person, where like I want to get every question mark, like I want to get everything in the map, but like sometimes it's just, you physically can't because the game is just so big. But he does leap out of Shani's window. And that's a cool little like harken back to the books where they'll give those like hardcore fans like something to cling on to, be like, oh my gosh, yeah, he did do this, and you can answer in the dialogue and see what happens, like what Geralt wants to say about this specific thing. But you guys get drunk, you get really drunk. At some point, Yennefer is there, and you can like sneak up to Yennefer's bedchamber and then like have drunk sex with Yennefer, and then like sneak back down to hang with the boys, and then like, and I really loathe using that term, but that's kind of what it is.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
At one point, you get to make a crank phone call, basically. Yep. You're using a sorceress's sort of like...
Megascope.
The Megascope. It reminds me of the devices used in Star Wars whenever they're trying to like do that weird video calling from in the Jedi Council chamber to the outside, where it's like the blue holograms. Yep. It's like that. But so you all get together, you're like, let's call some chicks. And it leads to my favorite... Lambert quote in the entire game, because you can choose not to. You can make dialogue choices throughout this entire thing that will immediately opt you out of the drunk quest, and you can choose whether or not you want to try to call the sorceresses. And of course, I chose yes. And Lambert yells, "Let's summon the bitches." And it's just so out of left field. It just caught me so off guard. It's hard not to laugh at that. So you go and you can also decide whether or not you want to dress up in Yennefer's clothing.
No, well, you can decide, but the drunk rationale behind it is like, maybe if we put on these women's clothes, they'll think we're Yennefer. And like,
this is where I accidentally opted out of the quest. My Geralt, I was like, no, that's a little too far for my Geralt. If you do decide to opt into it, you all squeeze into Yennefer's clothes. I forget if it was Lambert or Eskel. One of them like was weirdly into it, and then the other one is like, why do you like this so much? And they're like, don't worry about it.
right.
But you call, and it's not a woman that answers. It's this old guy who's very cranky for being crank called in the middle of the night. And Yennefer comes down and basically says, cut the shit.
Mm-hmm. And what's cool about this quest is that if you fulfill it all the way to the end, like you can opt out at any time. You know, be like, oh, I'm going to bed, guys, like whatever. Like Rick said, he didn't want to do the cross-dressing thing. Like I went all the way. I was like, I'm putting on the women's clothes. Like we're going for it. Like this is funny. This is amazing. I think this is so cool that like this expert monster slayer, like super badass who's over 100 years old is gonna put on Yennefer's lingerie and call the sorcerer. And it's a dude. He's, he thinks there's gonna be a woman on the other end of the line. Yennefer in the overworld, in the passing dialogue, the things that she says to you, she will bring that up if you finish that whole quest. And that's just like kind of like a continuity world building thing that I just really love.
Yeah, there's a lot of that in this game. I wish I would have done that in the quest. I remember feeling like a bit of a spoil sport whenever I said, not going to squeeze into Yennefer's pants. But yeah, definitely should have done that. Definitely see that all the way through. If you're playing along, if you're also playing, see that all the way through. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any other quests that stood out to you that you wanted to talk about before we move on?
There's the Velen quests in the beginning of the game, before the game starts to branch out and you get access to the entire world, I think are some of the best quests. But that's not really saying much, considering the quality of each quest gives something new and something different. And I think that leads us perfectly into the gameplay. There's no one quest in this game where I can be like, this quest was the absolute best by far, by like the largest margin ever. The margins are so close, and each one of the things that Geralt does in the game don't feel pointless. There are no fetch quests. There are no, go here.
There are some fetch quests.
But like the fetch quests are at least cute. Like the one where you have to find the Peller's goat. You remember that one?
My gosh.
And then
I was so happy that you have to go find this goat, and you basically escort it back to the Peller, who is sort of a shaman
who speaks in riddles.
Yeah. And you have to get his goat, whose name is Princess.
Yep.
So you are literally rescuing the princess. And there is a bear that is nearby, a bear cave. I stumbled across the bear cave before finding Princess. Very lucky that I did that, because I think at that time I was a little bit underleveled and still getting used to the combat. But yeah, rescue the princess.
For a very, very short quest, it makes a fetch quest at least interesting, where compared to other, in terms of like the pointless nature of other fetch quests in other games, where it's like, go find me 5 herbs so I can make this medicine, and then you bring it back to the person that gave you the mission, then you find the herbs, and it just feels pointless and it feels stupid. Like you're this amazingly powerful character and you're gonna go find this nobody some herbs. Like it just feels weird, and it makes the pacing weird. Like you need to find the Peller's goat so that the Peller can give you information about Ciri, and you'll kind of like do anything for Ciri, and there's that weight behind it. But if there is a fetch quest, I misspoke when I said there are no fetch quests. It feels genuine, and it's like, okay, I really need to get this thing for this guy. And most of the time, if someone is asking you for something that they really need, you have it anyway. And you can just kind of give it to them because your inventory is so large and vast that you can just be like, oh yeah, I have this here, take it, And then you just kind of give them whatever they need, like 5 orens or whatever. And that's the currency, and they'll give you something. But you want to talk about world building and kind of like the overworld and the way it's all situated and that stuff?
Yeah. Let's move on to the sort of the setting and the mechanics.
Yes.
Okay, did you want to talk on the setting or the mechanics first?
Let's talk on setting. Let's do setting. All right. So, there are a few main maps in this game. You start out in White Orchard, which the entirety of White Orchard is essentially the tutorial of the game. And it's a big map. It's a bigger map than you would think. And I remember when Rick started the game, he was like, oh, this is a pretty big map. Like, I'm in White Orchard for a while. And I was like, oh, that's the tutorial. Like, once you get past White Orchard, the game kind of opens up. And then when you get into Velen after White Orchard, you find out that the map is amazingly huge. So there's White Orchard, which is the start. Velen, which is where the Bloody Baron questline takes place. It's very swampy, war-torn. A lot of people are poor. There aren't a lot of like educated people. There isn't a lot of color in the world. It's all like very bleak. Novigrad is the main city, which is modeled after a real city, and I don't remember the name of the real city, but I've heard it 1,000,001 times. But Novigrad is modeled after a real Polish city. Very colorful, very intricate, scholars, rich people. There's Skellige, which is a Nordic-inspired world, which is also in itself a gigantic map, like bigger than you'd think it would be. And what am I missing? I think that's it.
Would you count the Isle of Mist as one, or is that something?
I would count the Isle of Mist as one, but you can only travel there for the main quest, I believe, right? Or can you go back there?
I think it's only through the main quest.
Okay,
and then there are some settings in the main quest that you will encounter just due to story reasons. But why don't we just focus on the main areas that you can access at any time during the game? You can go there really whenever you want to.
Yeah. So we spoke a little bit about Velen. It's a lot of fields. It's a lot of poor like shanty towns, like shacks that people live in. Something to mention about the overworld as well. There's only one loading screen to get into each world, which I think is an incredible feat of game design. Like in terms of like, you can just walk into a town and walk into any house and there's no loading screen. And I know Skyrim is an older game, but you get a loading screen whenever you walked into any house, and that kind of like really took away. But you can walk in a house when it's raining, look out the window and see that it's raining. And I think that's just like a really cool feature.
Yep, and as far as the loading screens go, when you're fast traveling, on PC, they're not very bad.
No.
They go by pretty quickly. From what I understand on console, particularly, I think it was either the base PS4 or base Xbox One, the load times can be pretty egregious. I've heard some people saying that it took them up to a minute sometimes when they're fast traveling. That's probably exaggerated a little bit, but still, that's gotta suck when it comes to the flow of the game. I fast traveled pretty frequently whenever the option was presented to me. I think I'm going to try and not do that with future games and sort of not fast travel at all if I can help it. I don't know. I'll report back in a future episode on that.
Yeah, but I did. So people say the same thing with Breath of the Wild. It's easy whether you fast travel or not. It's pretty easy to get around in the world. We'll talk about movement and gameplay, but like the maps and the way that it's laid out, it makes it pretty friendly as long as you stay on most of the roads to get from place to place. If you're impatient like I am and you want to Skyrim your horse up the side of a cliff, you can't really do that.
Yeah, that's one area where this differs. Horses are not creatures of the gods in this game. Although I will say that was dealing with Roach, the horse, was really the only time I would encounter bugs in this game. If I tried to run down a slope that was too steep, Roach would sort of buck up onto his hind legs and then stay on his hind legs and run down the mountain, which was pretty cool. Nice. Very unsettling to watch. And then occasionally whenever I would stop Roach, his front legs would stay on the ground and the back half of his body would bend upwards toward the sky in an L shape, which would put his front feet on the ground and his hind feet parallel to the ground. Sort of like a horse version of a T-pose, I guess, which was really entertaining. But those were really the only bugs I got.
Yeah, pretty immersion-breaking bugs, but like funny nonetheless. If you look at it in the sense of like how big this game is, have
you never parked your horse before and had it T-pose on you?
I mean, on PC when I played the first time, I had a lot of Roach glitches. But that was like in 2015, and a lot of the Roach glitches were patched out by CDPR. But I also have like 5 or 6 roach mods on and I can talk about a whole section on modding if we so decide to, but that fix a lot of the roach things. But so that's Velen. Velen is the music in Velen. Oh, we have to talk about the music too. Like the music in each of the sections is brilliant in the way that it helps like with the world building. They use a lot of authentic Polish instruments. They use a lot of they used a lot of it is recorded in Polish, no matter what version of the game you're playing and what language. The music is in Polish, or a lot of times just like gibberish speak, because it's a lot of like screaming and like guttural yelling and things like that. It makes you feel very it feels grassroots. It feels
sure.
It makes it feel like you really are in this this world of like knights and jesters and dragons and things like that.
It was a little bit, it reminded me a little bit at times of sort of John Williams-esque, but I appreciated that it was a really healthy mixture of orchestral soundscape and then, as you said, authentic instrumentation. I didn't sound like any of them were true period instruments, but it's the whole game is not going to be, orchestral strings planing. It is a mixture of sort of orchestral things, and then, if you're in the active town square in Novigrad, you're going to hear like lively lutes with some percussion, basic percussion instruments, recorder, maybe some flute, and then saving the actual orchestral stuff for maybe cutscenes that are super cinematic and important like that. But largely, if you're just existing in the world, you're going to hear really the sounds that you would hear if you were there. So those sort of folksy grassroots, just a couple of folks getting together with a lute, a recorder, and a dream just playing. And that was, that really added to the immersion. I really, this soundtrack is really top notch. It's one that I could listen to it. I could just put it on while I'm doing other things, and it's enjoyable.
I'm actually such a nerd that I listen to the Witcher soundtrack when I work out. I'm dead serious. There's a couple of the
you gotta songs. Get that Geralt bod,
dude. There's a couple of the songs from that soundtrack that just like push me over the edge, man. I'm like, oh, I'm going. I'm like, I got it. I got that last rep. Like, I'm gonna do it.
You're not gonna fist fight a bear if you don't have that Geralt bod. How else are you gonna get there?
You do fist fight a bear in this game. I forgot about that.
Bear.
I do want to mention for anyone that is listening who would like to know more about the music from people that are more well versed on the actual soundtrack and the way it was made, because if it took them as long to make the voice acting, I can almost guarantee it took them long to make the soundtrack for this game, because it fits so well. It's so good. I did not find myself being annoyed by any of the music in this game. And you spend a lot of time in menus. You spend a lot of time in like certain places doing certain things, because it is an RPG and there's a lot of collecting and character elements to it. The music is so well done. It's so immersive. There is a documentary by CDPR on the CDPR YouTube channel that you can look up, and it's really, really cool. I would highly recommend if anyone would like. I haven't watched it in years, but if anyone would like to watch that is there. Let's move on to Novigrad. Yeah. Different section of the map, big city, dense city. It feels like people live here, and I think that's a really awesome aspect to it. You're walking through Novigrad and you kind of feel as if like each house has a story and each character has something to say to you, and shops sell different things. All merchants don't really sell the same thing, and the city kind of like winds and twists, and there's bridges and hills and poorer sections and richer sections. There's a harbor section. The merchants are near the harbor section. Like, there's little pieces to the story that and the world building that make the world feel believable. Also, something that I heard in another podcast and actually read on Reddit was that the city of Novigrad is surrounded by fields to feed the city and feed the people, which I think is like a very historically accurate way of building a world like that.
Yep, that makes sense. The final area is Skellige. Skellige is off the map. It's in the middle of an oceanic territory. It's like a series of fishing villages, and this was probably my least favorite map of the game.
Agreed.
It reminded me a lot of the Frozen Wilds in Horizon Zero Dawn, and a lot of the ice-oriented areas in Skyrim. I say it's my least favorite, not necessarily because the design is bad, because I think the design is good. I like having areas like this in games. It's just a pain to traverse within. I find it difficult to maintain progress when I have to find creative ways around mountains. There are some falls that, if Geralt, there are some falls that are too high for Geralt that are not too high for Rick, where, like, if Geralt falls, you die, but it's like a space of 5 feet. That's a little bit frustrating. And sailing around, sailing is done very well, but it's often a little bit tedious, particularly sailing to the Isle of Mist. But there are a couple times in Skellige where you need to don a boat and go somewhere. It looks really pretty, but I found it a little bit annoying with how often I was required to do that.
Right.
And, swimming is not much better. But, sailing, not my favorite. But otherwise, Skellige, it's very gray. It's just totally gray scape. Not a ton of money. I get the sense that the economy here is largely non-existent.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, lots of fishing for their food, lots of, using whale blubber and things like that for
very
light and
hunter-gatherer-esque kind of society.
Yep, for sure. I like the citizens here quite a bit, and some of the main characters here, like the On-Crake. Is it On-Croc or On-Crate?
Croc On-Crate is one of the names of the characters, okay. So yeah.
Yeah, I get his first and last name mixed up. I like the characters a lot. The characters are fantastic here. Setting, I'm just not wowed about.
Yeah, the to reiterate, like, it's a lot of mountains, and the mountains are pretty much unnavigable except for one way. And on the boat mechanics, Skellige is a giant island, and they are a seafaring society. In terms of map building and world building in the entirety of the game, there are a lot of question marks that the game will give you, where you can go to said question mark on the minimap or on the overworld map and be like, hey, I wonder what's here. And it'll be either like a bandit camp or like a hidden treasure or a collectible of some kind, an armor set or sword diagram or some kind of crafting thing that you can use. There's a lot of water question marks in Skellige. And I am very much a completionist in a lot of the games that I play. Like, I want to do all the question marks, and I just really, after I did 5 or 6 of them, and I was like, screw this, dude. I would get out to a place, like, far away. Some drowners which is a type of monster, probably the most common type of monster in the game, would break my boat. My boat would sink. I'd be Geralt swimming like a mile offshore, and then I'd have to swim back, and it would take me like 10 minutes. And that's just like the kind of thing where I'm just like holding W and just swimming, and I really did not enjoy that at all.
Yep, I appreciate the realism that they have there, because when you're swimming, you don't move quickly, you don't have a lot of flexibility, and that's how Geralt would swim. He's got to be a solid 220 pounds of muscle plus all of his equipment. He's not going to be streaming through the seas. Right. So it's accurate, but that doesn't mean that it's enjoyable. And I'm with you. A lot of the times, a drowner or a harpy would get my boat and it would crash. I would hit a rock that I didn't even see.
Yep.
That was just under, and my boat would just kind of go topsy-turvy. And then suddenly you're swimming for a mile, like you said, just holding W and shift. And, that's a bit of a bummer. That's the one time where I wish global fast travel at all times was a thing. So you could just kind of do the Bethesda weaseling your way onto like the side of a cliff and then just fast travel out of there.
One of the first mods that I installed on my second playthrough was fast travel, because you can only in the overworld, and I guess we can move into mechanics and gameplay. In the overworld, you can only fast travel from a fast travel sign. So you have to go to the sign, interact with the sign, and then you can travel to another sign, which I understand the impetus behind that, because the world is not so... What's great about the gameplay in this is that you can go anywhere to any town, any little village, any place in the forest, and find something that's interesting and meaningful, this entire world is just full of these little nooks and crannies of people that you can talk to and things that you can interact with. And every side mission feels like it has weight, even if it's a useless side mission that you had at level 12, and you're now level 50 or whatever. These side missions still feel like they have weight and they feel important. So I can understand CDPR's rationale by saying like, oh, you can't just fast travel from anywhere. But also, if you want to turn that option on, I don't understand why you shouldn't just be able to.
Yeah, it would have been nice to have an active choice in that.
Yeah. So in terms of gameplay, I know you wanted to talk about Geralt's weight and the way that Geralt feels. That was something that we spoke about a bit.
Yeah, let's dive into some of the mechanics. So just as basic movement, again, Vince and I, we both played it on PC. Sometimes there was a little bit of hassle in using WASD to move, occasionally when you had to do a quick circle, or maybe you're standing directly on top of something you need to examine. So in that sense, a controller may have been a little bit more preferable. I largely felt that, keyboard and mouse was ideal. Mm-hmm. The combat, in terms of moving, combat is a little divisive in this game. A lot of people cite this as their main criticism, and indeed one of the reasons that they can't get into the game. And I was thinking about this, if you have a sliding scale of 0 to 10, 0 being super floaty, like Skyrim, where it doesn't feel like you weigh anything at all. You can just kind of press your buttons and you're swinging and you're always moving, to like 10 being ultra precise, like frame perfect, like Smash Melee or Dark Souls. I would call this roughly like, a 6 or a 7. Geralt, the combat's slower, and Geralt definitely feels like he weighs, what did I say before, like 220 pounds plus all of his material. Mm-hmm. So like when you're swinging your sword, it doesn't feel like you are weightless, right? Like a ballerina or Spider-Man on ice. It feels like there's weight behind it. And that was largely what turned me off of the game at first. And once I started getting comfortable with it, I actually came to prefer it. I don't know that I would say that I prefer it over something like a Souls game, but certainly to, going back to something like Fallout New Vegas or Skyrim, the combat just feels real bad. It never felt good with those games, but playing something like Witcher really highlights its inconsistency. So I really liked the combat and how it moved. I liked it quite a bit.
Yeah, I installed a few mods to change the way that the combat works in terms of like dodging and parrying and pirouetting. In this game is very much like Souls in this, and like the most committing parody that you see to Souls is that you click a button and you get the animation. So if you don't time the animation at the right way, like if you click for Geralt's he has a fast attack and a strong attack, and a parry, which is a block, and you can time the block so that you can parry swords. You can also parry certain monsters. There is a short dodge, and then there is a roll dodge. And those are pretty much the only movement aspects that you get in the game. You can change the camera to attack whichever enemy you'd like to. You can press Z to lock on to a certain enemy. But if you click fast attack, and you get a certain fast attack animation, you committed to that fast attack animation. If the water hag is over there and it also committed to a strong attack animation, that water hag is going to overcome your fast attack animation.
Yeah.
And you're going to get hit,
And I think that's a sticking point to a lot of people as to why they don't like it. With Souls games, your attack is going to always be the same, and it's always the same amount of frames. You can really lock it in. With Witcher, you have a variety of them, which to me makes it feel, a little bit. It's got a little bit of RNG to it, but it does make it feel a little bit more realistic to me. Also, it's worth mentioning the combat animations look gorgeous.
Yep,
like really, really stunningly well done. I can't imagine how long it took them to like get those animations in combat so fluid. And it's not just Geralt; it's the enemies, it's Vesemir, it's Ciri. Lambert, it's really anybody that's fighting in this game. The animations are so smooth in combat. It just really looks beautiful. And I'll frankly take that over something like a Souls.
Right.
Most days of the week. Maybe not all the time, but most days.
Right. You get hit in this game, it looks like you get hit. a character, you slice your sword into a human, like, it will slice that human in half. It's very bloody. Like, you do an animation where it looks like you're chopping that guy's arm off. Like, you chop that guy's arm off. Like, his arm is gone, and it feels real. Every hit feels heavy. It feels like it has weight. It feels like it has body, and it's satisfying to do. And I think that like Rick said, the combat is polarizing, but once you figure out the pillars of the combat, depending on the difficulty level that you're playing on as well. I played on Death March, which is the hardest difficulty, and I know Rick played on normal, I believe.
Yeah, I played it on the basic, not the lowest. There are 4 tiers. I didn't play on the lowest tier. I played on one above that. And towards the end, I definitely felt like I should have been at a much higher difficulty. But just for the sake of consistency, to gauge, sort of how consistent the level scaling was, I kept it where it was.
Yeah. So, like, depending on the difficulty that you pick, the combat takes on, like, a whole different vibe. You have to use certain aspects of the combat. So in terms of the tools at the Witcher's disposal, like we said before, I believe we mentioned that you can use basic magic glyphs, and there are 5
those are
different...
the Witcher signs.
Yes, 5 different Witcher signs. Ard, which is a pushing sign. Igni, which is a fire sign. Írden, which is like a glyph slowdown sign. Axii, which is a kind of like a mind control psychic sign, where you can kind of use on enemies to either slow them down or turn them against each other or whatnot. And Quen, which is a shield sign, which gives you a shield. Some of them are more useful than others, but you have to use these signs if you're playing on higher difficulties. You have to use potions. Potions are a big part of the gameplay if you're playing on higher difficulties. There's blade oils that you can use for specific monsters. There's bombs. There's a crossbow. You have different sword stats, you have different armor stats as well, and this is all true to a WRPG, like, you have different aspects of your character that you can cater to the way that you want to play the game, but if you're playing at a higher difficulty, you have to utilize every single one of these. You can't be only, like, a mage class. You know what I mean? Yep,
and it's really helpful to the codex in this game. You get a bestiary and you get a character codex. They're really well done. Codexes, I don't dislike them. I feel neutral towards them. These ones are really helpful, partly because of how in-depth they go, but also they're written in a specific voice. I think it's implied that Dandelion is writing all of the quest log and all of the bestiary, and it shows. Like, reading through this stuff, it's not boring. It really is like picking up, like, short stories from the actual universe. And reading through them, and it's really good. And you could read through each of the entries in the bestiary to see what monsters are weak against what, and sort of how to best them, which plays into which signs you're going to use, as you mentioned, and which bombs, which oils, things like that. Because if you just sort of go in hacking and slashing, even on normal difficulty, you're eventually going to run into some trouble. Best case scenario just takes a long time, and it becomes a game of endurance. Worst case scenario, you just straight up cannot hit something. So you always want to check within that bestiary, stay up to date about that, so you can more efficiently take out your enemies.
Right. The fact that the lore ties into the gameplay so well, and that the bestiary and the codex are so user-friendly and so well done, is just another testament to, like, the well-roundedness of this game. It's an open-world game. You're running around in the woods. You find a Leshen. What kind of monster is a Leshen? I need to look at my bestiary. Oh, a Leshen is I think it's a hybrid. I need hybrid oil. A Leshen is weak to this certain type of sign, and it's weak to this certain type of bomb. Let me equip those bombs. There are mods that I use in the game where if I know that I'm in a forest... something that's a little bit... immersion breaking is you can do the Breath of the Wild thing where you can, like, hit pause and then eat a bunch of food, or you can just equip all your potions and then be like, oh, I'm ready now, but
you
something...
can really gorge yourself on, like, rotting meat while you're fighting.
I'm gonna eat 6 croissants. Hold on, give me 1 second.
This is gonna go great. I'm carbing up. I'm fast.
Exactly. So, like,
then you turn into, and without turning into Michael Scott during the fun run. You can just carb up as much as you want, and you're good to go.
Without turning into Michael Scott at the fun run. But yes, to Rick's point, Michael Scott at the Fun Run is something that you can either as a player say, I don't want to do, I don't want to do the whole, I don't want to do the whole pause and then like raise my stats kind of thing and fix myself up. You can choose to do that.
Comes down to how hardcore you want to role play.
Yeah, exactly.
I think at the end of the day, for me, it's like I'm still playing a video game. You know what I mean? I'm okay with doing that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Especially from what I understand in Death March, you kind of have to sometimes.
Yeah, so there will be some times where like I will do that if I have to. Like if I'm in a cave and a bunch of drowners just like appear out of nowhere, or like a lot of times in a mission you'll be doing like a follow quest, which I despise, but you'll be doing a follow quest, and then along the way, like along the path, you'll see that different enemies will appear, and it's kind of like a third of the way there, a bunch of wraiths, and then 2/3 of the way there, a bunch of gargoyles, and different enemies will appear, and you kind of have to like equip the different oils and potions and things like that you need to defeat these enemies. Because on the higher difficulties, I really can't stress enough that if you do not apply any oils to your sword and use nothing but just your sword and like a couple signs, you get hit once and you die. And that's just like, it's very Souls-esque in that way, that if you're not using the right weapon for the right boss or the right enemy, then you're kind of screwed.
Yeah, and it rewards you as the player for looking in the bestiary and learning the patterns of movement, using the right tools, things like that. It's not rewarding if you are going in and hacking and slashing and button mashing.
And it's friendly to the lore as well, because in terms of human enemies are usually pretty easy to defeat. They're easy to parry. They're easy to control in groups. You can pretty much just like light them all on fire, or just like knock them all down, or throw a bomb in there, like a poison bomb, and then just run in and finish them off. Monsters are harder to defeat. They're harder to parry and dodge and things like that. So it's very important to be able to distinguish between these enemies and kind of like be as lore appropriate as possible, and the game kind of forces you to do that.
Then, just like any other WRPG, there's swords and crafting, wherein you can create your weapons and your armor. There is a repair system in this game where your armor and weapons will degrade over time. They never outright break, which, might be a bit overboard, but I would have liked to see that. When they begin to need repairing, they will show up on your HUD screen highlighted in red, so you can always go to an armorer and, take care of that. That brings us also to the economy. Repairing your weapons does cost coin. I never felt like I had an abundance of coin, so I always had to keep an eye on and sometimes decide which ones I could let go and which ones I needed to repair right away. I never had enough coin to comfortably repair everything all at once until like the very end of the game.
Yeah, and this ties into the gameplay very nicely, because oftentimes if you're going along in the main quest and you're like, oh, I just want to continue the main quest, but I need more money to get this sword that I really want to craft, or I need this, I really want to play Gwent again, do this Gwent mission, I need to buy this Gwent card, or what have you. There's a bunch of different things you might need money for. You need to do a side mission. That's what Witchers do for work. Witchers never work for free, like Rick mentioned before. So you find a monster quest, you kill a monster, you get some money. Oftentimes it's not a lot of money, because that's just kind of the way, the nature of the overworld is that Witchers are not really seen as these high-class citizens. The more monsters that you kill, by nature, the less that you are necessary in the overworld. Eventually, all the monsters in the world will die, and you will be useless. And this is kind of like on the tail end of Witchers in terms of the populace of the world. This happens, like, I would say, in the latter half, if not very close to the end of the appearance and the abundance of monsters. So there are very few, if any, Witchers left. You scrounge up whatever pennies you can, so you can buy X amount of things. You can bet your money in fights, you can bet your money in Gwent cards, but it's never a lot of money, and it usually never makes a huge difference in your overall bank account. You can sell things.
I found that often, like, when you're betting like 10 crowns against this like poor as shit peasant person, and then you win, it's like you're robbing him of half his life savings, and you're like, oh, this will do nicely with the rest of my 2,000 coins.
Right, and it feels real to you because the game makes everything feel real, and there is one of the quests where they got one of the people fighting in like one of the people that challenges you to a fight, they're like, hey, can you please throw the fight? Like, my family needs to eat. And then you can either be like, yeah, I'll throw the fight, or like, no, I'm not throwing the fight. But then if you decide not to throw the fight because of your integrity, you can still give that peasant the money anyway.
Yeah, you can go back and give it to him.
Yeah,
I think with all of those, I think my Geralt was just like, nobody pushes my Geralt around. You know, you're gonna have to take this from me.
Same. And then I always want to
fight a bear.
It's absolutely ridiculous, the things that you do. But yes, oftentimes I would wind up giving them the money anyway, because I didn't really need that 10 coins compared to the 2,000 that I already had. Weapons and things cost a lot of money in the game, so it feels very rewarding once you save up all that money from doing all those side missions, to finally be able to afford that sword or afford that armor to be made. In terms of game... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're okay. One of the things that I noticed, Witcher falls into the trap that, you know, you'll spend all of your money to buy a really nice sword that's really overpowered, and then in roughly 30 minutes you'll find one that is just slightly better. That can be a little frustrating. I never felt that way about armor. I always felt like my armor purchases were well made and well spent. And then you can also, when it comes to armor, find master sets. This isn't something that I did on my playthrough, but I know that's something that you felt strongly about and definitely encouraged. Do you want to talk about the master sets?
Yeah, I'll talk about the. That's actually what I was going to talk about, so I'm glad that you brought that up. There are different schools of Witchers. So Geralt is part of the Wolf School. There's the Wolf School. The Viper School was added as DLC. There's the Cat School, the Bear School, and the Griffin School. And each one of the schools will cater more toward a certain play style, but like I said, you must play as an all-round, well-rounded play style. So this is no like Skyrim sneak class or like Skyrim archer class.
Yeah, you're not going to be a sneak archer and just take everything down in one hit.
Exactly. Like you can't just do that. You kind of have to play using all of the tools at your disposal, which I think is a very well-rounded way to design the game, because even though you can pick your choices, you can pick what your Geralt does, you're still playing as Geralt, and that's something to take note of. So in terms of like a choose your own story RPG, there are plenty of endings that you can choose from and make your Geralt do, but it's important to note that you must play in this all a well-rounded playstyle. The Griffin School is the signs class of armor. Bear School is swords. Wolven School is the all-around class, and that was an armor that was added as DLC. Viper is a poison class, but there's only swords, I believe. The Viper School is probably the most useless one. You get that in the beginning of the game, and you quickly out-level the items, and you kind of just like let them go. A la Borderlands style, where like you get a gun, and you're like, oh, this gun is like X level, this is great. And then you level up 5 levels, and then the enemies are the same level as you, and then the gun is useless, you know? And then... What's here? Cat School is the speed and sword class, and then there's also an alchemy aspect to the cat armor as well. I always chose Wolven class, and there's 5 levels of armor. There's the regular one, there's the enhanced, there's the superior, and then there's the master crafted, and then there's the grand master sets that were included in the DLC. So you can get a set of armor, and I really like this armor, I really like this playstyle, find the diagrams, find the materials, and then as you go through the game, you pay merchants to upgrade the armor, but it's not like you get it all at once, because again, this does cost money, and money is hard to find in this game, so it makes it feel fair and balanced. But you can also play the game without ever doing any of those. You never have to do a single one.
Yep. Yeah, I really like the cat armor myself, and you can find actually a couple of Witchers that are in the universe from those schools, depending on how you handle the Witcher 2 simulated save at the beginning. The Viper School Witcher may or may not be around. In my playthrough, he was not. That was really the only time in the game where I thought that it was not handled well in terms of sort of background. That whole simulation save was alphabet soup to me. So I did not get to meet the Viper dude. There is also a former Witcher from the Cat School, that opens up a really, really cool quest, where you essentially decide on whether or not you want to kill him or not. The TLDR on that is that he murdered an entire town. They asked him to do something. He did it. He asked for payment. They said no. And it just escalated. So you find this entire town slaughtered, and you find the Cat School former Witcher and deal with him as you see fit. Super cool. The Bear School armor, I always kind of laughed at. It looks like you're wearing giant oven mitts.
It looks ridiculous.
It does kind of look ridiculous. But they're neat. I didn't, in my playthrough, get any of the master armor. I didn't scale the difficulty. I stayed on normal, and I never really felt like I needed it. For my subsequent playthrough, I'm certainly going to focus on that. You get the master armors through scavenger hunts, which scavenger hunts in video games are some things that I really, really detest. They're so often not done well. And with these scavenger quests, you are given clues, but you are not given map markers. So it really does feel like a true scavenger quest. And when I say I don't like those, it's less the act of finding something, and more so I hate feeling lost in video games. It's the number one thing in a game that will make me put it down, is if I perpetually feel lost. And with some of these scavenger hunts that I started to attempt, I didn't like that feeling. So I didn't think that it was worth the investment for that specific playthrough. Certainly will be once the difficulty gets ranked up.
Right. And that's actually a really great segue into kind of the open world tropes that CDPR navigates and tries to get through. And one of them is the fetch quest, the treasure hunt quest, like that kind of open world RPG aspect where it's like, you must go here and find this thing so that you can be better and fight more better enemies and be better. It navigates that well because these Witcher sets that you find are tied to the past, and you oftentimes will find letters or pieces of lore, and you can read about the person that designed this armor. You can read about this Witcher or this Witcher school, or to bring you to like an old Witcher stronghold that's now destroyed. Something along those lines, and it makes it feel very immersive in the world. It's not just like, oh, go here, find this. Oh, you found it, great. There's things that tie all of these items, and they give them gravity and weight, and that's what's nice about what CDPR does. And it doesn't make it feel useless. And even if you have one set of armor and you want to find the others, it's cool to find those letters and be able to read them and read about the past Witchers and things like that. Some other tropes, if you don't mind, this is a big one that I would love to bring up. So in open world games, you oftentimes will advance in your level higher than the rate of. So you'll level up past certain side quests, and then you go back and try to do the side quests, and then you get like 1 XP, for doing the side quests. And I think that's like a really common trope in open world games, especially open world RPGs. This game does not handle that well at all. It's really, really not good. You can go through in the main story, and you can either pick to be over-leveled for the main story or over-leveled for the side quests. You can do the side quests all in order, but if you do every side quest in Velen, by the time you get to Novigrad, you're already higher level than all the main quests in Novigrad, and then you wind up getting less XP, and you just level up slower, and it makes very little sense to me why.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I remember I somehow manhandled a level 23 quest whenever I was level 15. Thinking that I would get like a ton of experience points, and it really didn't work out that way. My experience was that experience points are largely, the same throughout the entirety of the game. You're going to get roughly the same amount for, different contracts and quests, and roughly the same amount for story-driven ones. A lot of story-driven ones will give you like 10,000. A lot of the contracts, no matter what level, you're going to get like 100. So in that way, it's not really worth going out of your way to doing those super over-leveled quests, because you might get like a nice sword out of it, but you're not going to get the boost of XP that you're looking for.
That's a fair point. That's true.
One thing that I do like about how this game handles levels is you can decide whether or not you want enemy level scaling on or off. And enemy level scaling, that's when if you're level 10... and you go to a place that has level 25 enemies, you will get got. And if you go to level 1 enemies, you will, pretty easily defeat them. with scaling, it sort of keeps everything roughly at your level. I kept this off for the entire game because I like that surprise of accidentally stumbling upon an enemy that's like 10 levels higher and thinking like, oh, how do I get out of here? And also, it just makes sense to me, you know, like if I'm a Witcher that's been training for the past 100 hours, I don't want to encounter a drowner and, you know, struggle against it, right? That's not what would happen. I would get that thing.
Interesting you say that, because my perspective was the opposite.
Oh yeah?
The level scaling will actually not bring your enemy level down. So your enemy
Did I get that mixed up?
Yes. The enemy level will stay higher if it's higher. But if you are encountering a level 2 drowner, it will bring them up to a level 25 drowner, and then it will make the battle feel more it'll make it feel like it has more weight always. The enemies, especially on the highest difficulty with combat mods and with the level scaling, the enemies never feel too easy. But for me, if you know how, like if you can kind of navigate the game and figure out how to get that right balance of your own character playstyle, it also never feels impossible, but you have to find that right balance. And I think that's a great aspect.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. That could be something that I would get behind. You know, because I'd never actually used the enemy scaling option. I think it was explained a little poorly on an online post, and I just, you know, said, I'll just play it as is. I won't mess with that.
Yeah, and there's honestly nothing wrong with either way of playing it, because it's really satisfying in an RPG sometimes to be like, oh, I'm level 50, you're level 10. From Pokemon when I was a kid all the way up to now. Like, oh, I'm going to whack you with whatever, and you're just going to die. I feel like a god. That's awesome, you know?
Yeah, that feeling of you're going back through Pallet Town, and on the way you run into somebody that you must have missed, and they're like, we must battle now. And you're like, all right, I mean, I just beat the 7th gym, so send out that Metapod. I'm going to crush it with my Machamp. I'm going to snap it in two.
Right, just do it, kid. I dare you. And then give me your $6.
Yeah, beat it, kid. This is my town.
Other overworld tropes open world tropes, I should say. A big one in this game that I just don't think CDPR does well, but I think are really not very navigable in any open world game. If anyone ever finds a solution, let me know. I would love to get some emails about it, but it's this kind of thing like, oh, we're going to confront the wild hunt. Like, we're going to finally beat the wild boss. But wait, hold on. I need to go finish all my card game quests first. So, I know that we're about to have the final battle, guys, but like, can you just like one second? Just hold on. I'm just going to go finish all this first. And then you go and like travel across the whole overworld. It's to find everyone who you did not beat in a game of cards.
Yeah, I felt that way a couple of times, but especially, you know, when I'm going to fist fight a bear, you know, I'm thinking, all right, I mean, the world is about to end, but I guess I could slug an animal for an hour or two.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know of any game that does handle that well, now that I think about it.
No, I mean...
Maybe Majora's Mask? With the time travel mechanic?
I mean, that's also not necessarily an open world game. That's more of a narrative driven game too. But I understand what you're saying. The time travel mechanic, if you don't get something done by the end, by the time that the moon crashes, then you can just like redo it the next day, or the next 48-hour cycle. Like, I get that, and that's a great mechanic to introduce to kind of make it feel like it has more weight. But yeah, that's like a pretty common open world thing that I just don't think has really been solved. It doesn't make a lot of the urgency where it's like, you must get here within this time. Like, you as a player know you do not have to get there within that time. You could just diddle and dawdle around and do whatever you want to do and not get there. You could do everything but that. You could do every other side mission. That's just something that I noticed that's pretty heavy. It's not world breaking because the world is created so well and the atmosphere is so good and everything else is so good about it, but it does make it feel inauthentic in pacing.
Yeah, it's like, you know, right before you sail and, you know, battle the wild hunt, you can choose I'm not ready yet, and then you leave, and like you said, you can go off and do a million card games and come back and that person is still standing in that exact spot.
Yep.
And, you know, it comes back to, at some point, it's just video game things, and that's probably not going to get fixed in a meaningful way. But it is, you know, once you notice it, it's like, oh, okay, you know, I guess time wasn't really of the essence then. You've just been hanging out here.
Just been chilling.
Meditating for the past week.
Right. Big chilling. Let's see what other tropes. There's the tropes of, like, obviously, when you talk to a character more than once, like, you're not going to get the same dialogue. You kind of get desensitized by talking to the same blacksmith over and over again, that they say the same thing over and over again. If there's like a master blacksmith or like a master armorer that the game developer knows that you're going to be talking to a lot, they could at least try to give them a little bit more dialogue so that it's not the same vanilla thing over and over again. And the facial animations, I think this is a good place to talk about that as well, are just not very good in this game. But and to be perfectly honest, even in CDPR's newest game, in Cyberpunk 2077, the facial animations are not that much better, and that's in 2021. Yeah. And this game was made in 2015, so it's not like that's been miraculously fixed.
That's something that comes with the territory. I can imagine that would significantly increase dev time and really, 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 really overwork the animators. That's something that I'm willing to overlook, I think, on games like this. Not so much on games like The Last of Us, where it's much more linear.
Agreed.
You know, it's not linear, but it's more linear than something like this. It doesn't bother me. I notice it, but it doesn't bother me.
No, it doesn't bother. Once you get over it, you're like, okay, I'm over it. You know, and that's it. Like, it is what it is. But the voice acting is so good that a lot of times it trumps the facial animations anyway, and it makes it feel more weighted because the voice acting is so good. You have to accept the fact that in an open world game, in a game where you could easily spend 75 hours and not cover, and only cover about 60% to 70% of the game, the facial animations can't be what they are, else it would have taken them twice the amount of time to put all that in there.
Definitely.
And all of the things that are important, like combat, are all there, so that's great. All right. Is there anything else you wanted to cover? I think we've
covered pretty much everything. We're not going to do the DLC for this one, no. I don't think. That's something that we can maybe revisit down the line. I didn't get to it in my playthrough. The DLC is hefty, so I wanted to make sure that I wasn't rushing through it whenever I did. Did you want to talk about Gwent at all?
Yeah.
So Gwent is a card game within the Witcher universe, and I did not engage with this at all. I engaged with the tutorial battle that you do in the tavern in White Orchard. I did not find this to be interesting or intriguing at all. I typically find card games in video games to be underwhelming. Triple Triad in Final Fantasy VIII did it really well. I didn't even mind Tetramaster in Final Fantasy IX that much. But it didn't engage with me. I didn't find it to be very grasping. I appreciate the role-playing elements where sometimes you might just want to, if you're a Witcher hunting down monsters all day, you might want to play a game of cards because, you're still a normal human-esque being. So I appreciate that. But this game just had so much to offer me that I really, really wanted to get through it.
So Gwent for me was, I spent a lot of time doing Gwent, like so much time. And I think before the final quest, I must have spent at least a good 20 hours, like figuring out what to do for Gwent. So you can do the fist fighting quests, and they're great side quests. There's horse racing quests, and Gwent is the most immersive side quest line, I think. You can collect lots of cards, buy them from merchants. There's different faction decks, like there's a Skellige deck there, which is added in the DLC. There's a Scoia'tael deck, which is the elves, like the elven rebels. There's a Northern Realms deck. There's a Nilfgaard deck. Monsters. There's a lot of different ways that you can play the game. They added DLC cards in. I played with mods that added different cards and kind of balanced the game out, but the vanilla version is also excellent. I think it's a very interesting concept where you kind of want to have the highest score, and each character card has has a certain number of score, and there's 2 rounds, and the way that you balance out and play different cards, that even if you have a certain playstyle with like not so great cards, you can still beat someone with better cards by kind of just like outmaneuvering them or using cards that would, let's say, make all of your ranged units have a lower level, or make all your close combat units have a lower level. And I think that allowing players to have certain play styles was very smart of them. And also putting this little mini game in here with so much depth was just a really great addition. Kind of, you're in the overworld, you're looking for Ciri, but I just want to like stop and play a game of cards at this inn, and you can play every innkeep, you can find their cards, you can bet money, you can make a pretty good amount of money on Gwent. Not an amazing amount of money, but if you enter like the higher level side quests for Gwent, you can win a few, a few crowns. If you know Evergreen crowns, pretty hunky chunk of change. And it's great. So fun, so immersive.
I can appreciate it being in there. I've heard a lot of people say that, it's a nice sort of decompression kind of thing, like a relaxing thing after you're, traversing the land for 3 hours. I never felt that way. I just always wanted to keep exploring and seeing what's there. I do know there are a lot of really interesting quests and items that you can get. You can find out essentially that there's a black market for really rare cards, and people are straight up killing each other for them. Zoltan, the lovable dwarf, he's the big card collector as far as the main characters go.
Yeah, you culminate in the Gwent side quest. It's called like Gwent Underground Players, or I don't remember the exact name of the quest, but you're in this noble's house, and you have to get through 5 or 6 levels, almost like Elite Four style, where if you lose, and you kind of lose everything, and you can't go back and do it, and you just fail the mission. So you have to be really careful about your cards and your decks and who you play against who, and you can't have the same playstyle against everyone. There are some broken things about Gwent, where if you use the Northern Realms deck and then kind of stack certain cards that buddy up with each other and then double their they double their attack power, you can pretty much mow everyone down with just like one faction of decks. And there are like leveling mods that you can use that make the other decks more usable in the early game, because really you're playing Northern Realms deck for the first 50 to 60% of the game, and then once you unlock more cards later, you can use the other decks, which I think was kind of a dumb part of the entire like Gwent experience, was that you can only really use one deck and one play style for like a good portion of it. The mods kind of help that. And that's all I have to say about Gwent. There was an entire different game that was made that's just called Gwent, similar to MTG, that a lot of people really like.
Yeah, that came into existence. I think it was the devs, I could be wrong, but they sat down to actually play Gwent human to human rather than human to AI, and realized pretty quickly that, it's a little shallow if it's human to human. So the Gwent standalone game has some different mechanics to it. Like you said, that makes it a little closer to Magic. Again, not something I engaged with too heavily, but you can find it on Steam for relatively cheap, right? Or is it free?
I actually don't know if it's free, but whatever it is, it's definitely worth the money. I've never gotten into it really, because I've just liked it more in the context of The Witcher 3, and I'm not a fan of standalone card games like Magic the Gathering or what have you, but in The Witcher, I think it served a great purpose for me. So do you want to move into your final thoughts and maybe wrap up on this guy? This behemoth?
Final thoughts. Final thoughts on Witcher 3. Absolutely would give it a go for playing it. Whether you're a veteran or a newcomer, I think it offers a lot in terms of lore, gameplay, immersion. It's really, I think it's the pinnacle of WRPGs for me. I'll put it over Fallout as a whole. There are things I liked about Fallout New Vegas, especially a little more. But as an entire thing, Witcher 3 is a definite major go. Major go, to quote Flossie Carter. Can't recommend it enough. Like I said, 9.5 out of 10.
I agree. If you have the time, and even whether you know anything, and we've obviously talked a lot of spoilers in this game, but the odds that you're going to remember all of those spoilers and character names and things like that when you're going through this amazingly immersive game should not ruin it for you in the least. If you haven't picked up this game, if you haven't played it, even in 2021, it's literally $5 on Steam on every Steam sale, which is incredible to me. Just the base game, that a game this big, that a game of this scope could be $5-10 on Steam. This is the AAA game with the most eye candy, with the most immersion, it is an absolute behemoth of a WRPG. It does so many things well. The voice acting, the characters, the story. You can play this game for only the gameplay and not give two shits about the story, or you can play this game for only the story and not give two shits about the combat. You can play it however you want to, and within reason, really, like we said before, as Geralt. But the game is so worth it, whether you know anything about The Witcher or not. It is just a lovely game from start to finish, really.
Yep, absolutely. It is the game with the most game.
Yeah, for real.
So this is the first game that we've covered on the podcast. So there naturally are no follow-ups. But if you have any follow-ups or questions that you would like to address or write in with, any questions, follow-ups, comments, any spark of discussion, you can check the show notes and write into us. We'll probably save a little time at the end for any listener response, and we can talk about that a little bit. And yeah, feel free. We'd love to hear from you. And we'll always read listener responses to a game in the next installment.
Yeah.
So 2 weeks down the line, that's when we'll take care of that.
Concerns, criticisms, anything of the like, we'd love to hear it too. It's great to spark discussion.
Yep. And that's Witcher 3.
That is Witcher 3.